It was just past midnight when the phone rang. The kind of ring that slices through the silence like a warning, sharp and unwelcome. I'd been leaning back in my chair, staring at the muted glow of the dispatch monitors, letting the quiet press against my ears. But when that shrill sound came, I snapped upright, hand hovering over the receiver like I could touch the danger before it touched me. "1, what's your emergency?" I said, my voice steady, but there was that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always arrives when someone out there is afraid, really afraid. There was a pause, heavy and trembling. Then a woman's voice, low and breathless, barely above a whisper, spilled through the line. "Please, someone's in my cabin." "In the woods, I think." "I don't know." "I hear him." Her words tumbled over each other, broken by gasps and sobs. I could hear the shaking in her hands, the rustle of paper, maybe furniture, as though she couldn't sit still long enough to make sense of what was happening. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. Can you tell me your location?" I asked, pressing my pen to the paper in front of me, scribbling her name, the small town, and the general area she was in. "There's no street number. Just the trail off Pine Ridge. The cabin, it's old, I think. I've only been here a few nights." I didn't expect anyone to come. Her voice cracked, and for a moment she started sobbing outright. "Okay, stay on the line. I need you to stay calm and quiet. I'm dispatching a unit. Do you have a weapon? Anything to protect yourself?" I have a knife." "I keep it by the bed, but... Oh, God, he's moving. I think he's in the kitchen now." Her words were jagged, each one stabbing into the darkness over the phone, making the shadows in my little office feel sharper. I tried to picture her cabin, the way the wind might press against the windows, the thin walls rattling with every creak. The kind of place that invites the woods in even when you wish it wouldn't. "All right, I need you to stay quiet. Don't go into another room. Keep the door between you and him. Can you do that?" Yes, I think so." "Please, hurry." Her voice fell to a whisper, so fragile it felt like it could be snuffed out by the slightest sound. I could hear the quiet panic in the background, the cabin settling like it was aware of the fear inside it, stretching, groaning, waiting. My mind tried to focus. Pine Ridge. A tiny dirt road winding between trees so thick you could barely see the sky. The kind of place where help comes slow and every sound in the dark is amplified, monstrous. "Units are on the way, ma'am." "Help is coming," I said, trying to inject certainty into my voice. I didn't say it to comfort her. I said it to comfort myself. There was another pause, longer this time. Then the softest, strangest sound, a floorboard creaking, slow, deliberate, almost deliberate enough to make my stomach twist. I hear him. "He's at the window," she whispered. "Okay. Stay calm. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Can you do that?" I think so." Her voice was trembling so hard I could practically feel it through the line. And then suddenly a thud. Not a loud one, but solid, deliberate. "Something heavy hitting the floor. Did you hear that?" she hissed. "Yes," I said, my own voice tight. I could almost hear my heartbeat in my ears now, the slow drum of it reminding me how alone we both were, separated by miles of dark, cold woods. They're in the cabin. I can feel it. "Oh, God, please." She began whispering frantic prayers, the words choked and rapid. The kind of whispers that make you wonder if anyone ever really believes them, or if they're just a way to keep from screaming. I tried to keep her grounded, telling her to move slowly, to stay behind the door, to breathe. I had to keep her alive. I had to keep her talking, because the silence between words is where monsters live. The thuds continued, each one measured and heavy, echoing through the phone like footsteps in my own mind. My pen hovered over the paper, frozen, because no note could capture the dread settling over that cabin. "Not really, I think he's leaving." "No, he's at the kitchen again. I hear him moving things. Drawers, cabinets, something clanging," she whispered. I could feel my own fingers tighten around the phone, knuckles white, because I've been on this side before. The 911 side. You hear things that aren't supposed to be happening. People whose lives are fracturing in real time, and all you can do is breathe and type and talk. Hope your words are enough to hold them together until help arrives. Can you lock the door? The one you're behind? I asked, my voice low and careful. Yes, Oh God, I can't reach it. He's too close. Her words were barely audible, swallowed by the terror filling her cabin. I closed my eyes and pictured it. A small, fragile cabin, walls thin as paper, shadows pooling in every corner. A single woman alone, terrified, praying the darkness doesn't know her name. My stomach nodded. Ma'am, I need you to stay as quiet as you can. Listen to my voice. Don't leave the door. If you can, grab that knife and hold it in front of you. I'm trying. Oh God, he's at the door. My breath caught. That was too close. Too immediate, too real. I could almost feel him there, a presence in the dark, smelling fear like a predator. Stay calm. Remember your training. You have the knife. You have the door. Focus on breathing. My voice wavered, but I forced the words out. The line went silent for a beat. Too long. My heart slammed against my ribs. And then, a whisper. Low and deliberate, almost a hiss. You're not supposed to be here. I froze. My pen slipped. My stomach dropped. She hadn't said it. The words weren't hers. Ma'am, are you there? Did you say something? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes. He's gone. I think he's gone. Her voice was shaking, ragged. But there was a tremor in it. Something I couldn't place. A shadow behind her relief. Help is 5 minutes out. Can you keep the line open until they get there? Yes. Please, hurry. I stayed on the line, listening to the cabin breathe, listening to her shudder and whisper, counting the seconds until my unit would reach her. The forest was alive with sounds now, the wind rustling the leaves, the distant snap of a branch, the quiet, creeping fear that seems to linger long after the danger has passed. And as I watched the seconds tick by, I realized the weight of what I had just heard. The fear in her voice, the presence that wasn't hers, the way the shadows seemed to move differently after midnight. It stayed with me, clinging to the edges of my mind. The unit arrived, and I could hear the crackle of their radio, their shouts, the sound of boots on the dirt road. She was safe for now. But I stayed on the line until the last call came through. She's out. Cabin's clear. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring at the monitors, listening to the silence. The forest outside didn't care about safety. It didn't care about me or her, or the thin line we call civilization. It only waited, patient, quiet, and hungry, and I knew deep down that the night was far from over. I started the truck and rolled slowly onto Pine Ridge, headlights cutting weakly through the fog that had settled like a living thing across the road. The night was thick, the kind of darkness that presses in from every side, swallowing the trees and the horizon, leaving only the dim glow of my headlights to keep me company. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, the leather pressing into my palms as if it were trying to remind me that I was still here, still grounded, still human. The forest around me seemed to breathe, not in the way leaves stir in the wind, or the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, but in the slow, measured inhale of something aware, something patient. Every shadow seemed to shift just slightly, a corner of a tree leaning closer than it should, a branch dipping down to block a glimpse of the sky. I could feel it, almost smell it, the damp, musty scent of pine needles and earth, mixed with a cold hint of something metallic, like blood or rust. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind wandered to the woman on the line. Her voice, fragile and frantic, had stayed with me. The way she whispered prayers I didn't understand, the way she clutched at the phone like it was a lifeline, like it was the only tether keeping her from disappearing into whatever had been in that cabin. I could still hear her sobbing faintly, the trembling that made her words almost impossible to follow. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the road, the slow, winding trail. But the woods seemed to mock me. The fog thickened, curling around the headlights like smoke, obscuring the path, making familiar shapes strange. Trees leaned closer, their branches twisting like fingers brushing against the edges of my vision. Every time I blinked, it felt like the darkness had moved. The road wasn't just winding, it was alive, stretching and bending in ways that made me question if I had passed the same tree 3 times already. I flicked on the radio, static buzzing in my ears. Just noise, nothing to keep the forest at bay. I adjusted the rearview mirror, expecting to see movement, a shadow, a figure standing in the fog. There was nothing. But still, I felt it. Watching, patient, waiting. The truck's engine hummed beneath me, steady, grounding. But even that sound felt fragile, temporary, like the forest could swallow it whole if it wanted. I took a deep breath, tasting the fog. It was damp, cold, and it carried a faint, rotten tang, like something had died here long ago and the woods had never forgotten. I tried to reason with myself. Fog, isolation, late hour. That was all. My mind playing tricks. But reasoning didn't stop the chill that crawled up my spine. Didn't stop the sense that each tree was leaning closer, each shadow stretching just beyond what should be natural. And then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the truck, a branch scraping against the side, maybe a loose piece of metal. But no, it was something else. A soft, deliberate sound, like someone or something walking just out of sight. Footsteps on the wet earth, careful, slow, measured. I slammed a hand against the horn reflexively, and it echoed through the fog, but there was no response. No figure, no shape, nothing. Only the footsteps continued rhythmically, impossibly, keeping pace with me, though the road was empty. I told myself it was nothing. Animals. Deer, maybe. But the sound didn't shift. It didn't scatter. It followed. And with it came a pressure. A weight that pressed against my chest, slow, insidious, the way dread settles in when you're convinced something is just beyond comprehension. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. My mind ran through every scenario I had drilled for over years of patrol. Domestic disputes, cabin break-ins, mental breakdowns, lost hikers. Nothing prepared you for this. The feeling that the woods themselves were aware, that they were moving with purpose, that they were alive. A low fog rolled over the hood of the truck, thickening by the second. It clawed at the windshield, obscuring the road. I slowed, heart hammering, eyes scanning for any sign of the cabin. GPS was useless out here, signal gone. Just me, the truck, and the dark that seemed to press against the glass as if it wanted inside. And then the trees shifted, not with the wind, not naturally. They moved in sync, almost imperceptibly at first. A subtle leaning, a stretching, as if the forest itself was bending toward me. My stomach churned. I wanted to tell myself it was fatigue, the long night, the adrenaline, but it wasn't. I could feel it. The forest was not neutral. It was aware, and it was patient. I remembered the woman again, alone in her cabin, holding a knife, hearing footsteps in the dark. I felt her fear now in a way I hadn't before. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. Something ancestral, primal, the kind of fear that sinks into your bones and refuses to leave. I pressed on, each turn of the wheel slow, cautious, as the fog seemed to thicken even as the road narrowed. I kept my eyes on the faint glow of the headlights, but the trees kept creeping closer, shadows stretching, folding into the light. I had the strange sensation that if I blinked too long, the road would vanish entirely. A sudden crack to my left made me swerve slightly. Just a branch snapping under weight. Nothing more. But I could feel it. Movement. Something pacing me. My breathing grew shallow. Every instinct screamed to turn back to run, but I knew that wasn't an option. The woman. Help had to arrive. I flicked the radio off. Static filled the cab. Silence was worse. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed to echo like a drum in a cavern. Then I caught it. A shadow between two trunks. Quick. Faint. Human. I couldn't tell. It vanished before I could blink. I told myself it didn't matter. Keep going. Stay calm. Focus on the truck, the road markers I could just barely make out, and then the fog thinned slightly, and I saw it. A faint light, flickering between the trees, yellow, warm, not headlights, not fire, just a glow. My chest tightened. Could it be the cabin? Could it be her? I followed it carefully, each turn of the wheel precise, my mind screaming to stop, to slow, but also urging me forward. The light pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and for a moment I thought I imagined it. But then it moved again, deeper into the woods, just ahead of me, guiding me. I realized then that the forest wasn't just alive. It wasn't neutral. It was testing me, watching me, pressing me, trying to see if I would falter, if fear would take over. And maybe it was waiting for the wrong move. I felt sweat run down my back despite the chill. My hands were still tight on the wheel, my mind racing, heart thrumming. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but every instinct screamed for the woman, too. She was out there, alone, terrified, and I was the closest thing she had to help. The road narrowed further. The light ahead flickered again, and I could feel it. The weight of eyes, unseen but present, the brush of something that shouldn't exist in the back of my mind. I blinked, and for a second I thought I saw shapes moving in the fog. Figures, maybe human, maybe not, leaning from the trees as I drove past. And when I looked again, they were gone. I swallowed hard. Keep going. Just keep going. Somewhere ahead, deep in the heart of the fog and trees, I knew the cabin waited. The woman waited. And something else, something I couldn't name, waited too. I pressed the accelerator slightly, fog curling around the truck like smoke, the forest leaning in, watching, patient, alive. And in that moment, I realized that this road, this forest, wasn't just a path to the cabin. It was a test. And the woods always win, eventually, if you let them. I finally caught sight of the cabin through the thinning fog, its silhouette almost comforting against the dark line of trees. The headlights caught the worn boards and the crooked roof, the faint trail of smoke curling from the chimney. From a distance, it looked normal, quiet, still. Like any other abandoned retreat someone might stumble upon in the woods. My chest eased slightly, the tightness loosening for just a second. But I knew better. I always know better. The closer I got, the more the silence pressed against me, heavy and unnatural. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the wrongness of it. The forest around the clearing seemed to lean back, giving space to the cabin. But in doing so, it felt like it was watching, holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I killed the engine and stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. The fog swirled around my ankles like something alive, curling into the cracks between my toes. The air smelled of damp wood, earth, and something else I couldn't name. Metallic, acrid, faintly sweet. Something that triggered the same uneasy tightening in my stomach I'd felt since hitting the forest. The cabin door was closed. Nothing seemed disturbed. No signs of struggle. Just the faint, normal creaks of an old building settling into itself. And yet the silence was wrong. Every sound I made, the crunch of gravel, the soft squeak of my boots against the porch, seemed too loud, echoing too long, as if it shouldn't exist. I stepped closer, hand hovering over the grip of my pistol, though I knew better than to rely on it entirely. My eyes scanned the cabin, the windows reflecting the fog like mirrors. Nothing moved. Nothing. But then I caught it. A flicker of movement, shadow, just at the edge of my vision, between two trees. I blinked. It was gone. The hairs on my neck prickled. I reminded myself it was probably nothing. Fog, tricks of the light, the brain filling in shapes where there were none. But instinct doesn't lie. My gut told me that cabin wasn't empty. That woman was inside. And whatever, or whoever, had been following her wasn't just some random intruder. I called out softly, my voice low, careful. "Ma'am, this is the sheriff. I'm here. Are you okay?" No response. I stepped onto the porch, every creak of the boards under my weight sounding obscene in the quiet. The door felt warmer than it should have, like someone had just touched it. Or something. I shook the thought away. I tried the handle. Locked. Good. That meant she had at least barricaded herself. I slid the bolt open and pushed the door slowly. It swung inward with a soft groan, and the cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine. But also fear. Her fear. Lingering, heavy, clinging to the walls. Inside, it looked ordinary. A small living space, rustic furniture, a worn rug over uneven boards. Nothing out of place. Nothing, at first glance. But then I heard it. A soft scrape. Not loud enough to be a footstep, but deliberate, rhythmical, from somewhere in the back. Kitchen. Or maybe bedroom. I froze. Listened. The air was thicker now, oppressive, as if the cabin itself had drawn closer to hear me, to see what I would do. "Ma'am, you still there?" My voice was firm, but my throat felt tight. I heard a whisper in response. Maybe hers. Maybe not. It was indistinct, almost carried by the wind through the cracks of the cabin. It made the fine hairs on my arms stand up, the way small, insignificant sounds often do in places where fear grows unchecked. I moved slowly, boots soft on the floor. Every step seemed to echo too long, dragging shadows along with it. I passed the kitchen, and there was nothing. Dishes stacked neatly, a kettle on the stove, steam long since dissipated. But the scrape had come from here, or nearby. I reached the bedroom. Door closed. My hand hovered over the knob. Heart pounding. Breathe steady. I knew she should be inside. She should be holding herself together, trembling, yes, but alive. Yet the room felt wrong, too cold. The shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners. And then I noticed it. The blankets disturbed. Not from sleeping, not just messy, like something or someone had shifted them recently. I stepped back, taking in the room, trying to anchor myself in reality. But then I saw movement again. Flickers, fleeting at the edge of my vision. Shapes slipping between walls and furniture, impossibly fast, impossibly quiet. Each time I looked directly, nothing was there. And each time I blinked, I felt like something leaned closer, breathing against the edge of my awareness. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze back to the center of the room. It was too quiet. And yet I could feel it. The pressure, the awareness, the sense that the cabin wasn't empty. That presence, patient, watching, waiting. I could feel it pressing at the back of my mind, whispering, shaping thoughts, seeding doubt. The floorboards creaked behind me. Not one, but a series of soft, deliberate sounds. I spun around, pistol raised, but saw nothing, only shadows pooling like water in the corners. I tried calling her name, but my voice sounded foreign in the room. Loud, harsh, unwanted. And then I heard her whisper again. Softer this time, close, behind the wall, under the bed. The sound was impossible to pinpoint. I realized then that the cabin itself was different at night. Not just old, not just creaky, not just empty. Alive. Not like the forest which watches from outside. This was within, a presence that breathed and shifted, that listened to my heartbeat and my fear, and used both to stretch the darkness around me. The shadows moved again. Not human, not animal, but purposeful. Gliding along walls, creeping just beyond the edges of light. I followed them with my eyes. But each time I blinked, the shapes flickered away, leaving only that oppressive sense of being watched. I thought about the woman, alone, waiting, terrified. My stomach twisted with guilt. She was out there or somewhere in here, and I had to find her. But every instinct screamed caution. Every fiber of my being told me that stepping further into those shadows could be dangerous in a way no human confrontation ever could be. I forced myself to breathe, one step at a time. Focus, ignore the whispers, ignore the flickers. Focus on the doorways, the corners, the places someone could hide, and then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, but not my own. Not hers, coming from the far side of the cabin out of sight. They didn't echo. They didn't announce themselves. They were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if whatever was moving had all the time in the world. I froze. My pulse thrummed in my ears. Shadows pooled at the edges of the room, and I could feel them moving just a fraction faster than they should. Faster than reality allowed. The air felt thicker now, harder to breathe. My mind filled with possibilities, none comforting, all plausible in a way that made the rational part of me scream and the instinctive part want to run. I whispered again, softer this time. "Ma'am, it's me, Sheriff. Stay calm." "Where are you?" Her voice finally. A whisper, barely audible from the corner, shaking, fearful, relief mixing with terror. I'm here, under the bed." I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. "Keep her calm. Keep her talking. Keep her alive." Slowly, carefully, I approached. Every step measured, every shadow accounted for. The weight of unseen eyes pressed in, but I forced myself onward, toward her, toward safety, toward the fragile flicker of normalcy that still lingered in the room. And yet, as I reached the bed, I knew the truth. This cabin was not just a building, not just wood and nails. It was a living, breathing trap. Shadows between the trees, shapes at the edge of sight, the faint whispers that followed you even when no one spoke. It was patient, and it was hungry, and I was not sure any of us would leave here untouched. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the cabin looming before me like a dark sentinel. The fog had thinned slightly, but the air still carried the weight of unseen things, thick and heavy, pressing against my chest. The headlights of the truck illuminated the worn boards, the crooked roof, and the narrow porch, but the shadows clung stubbornly to every corner, stretching unnaturally long. The cabin looked empty. Too empty, too still, and that was exactly what made me uneasy. I stepped forward, boots crunching softly on the wet earth. The door was closed, its paint chipped and peeling like it had been ignored for years. And yet, there were signs someone had been here recently. Footprints in the mud, damp and distinct, leading up to the porch. Smudges on the windows where someone's hand had pressed too hard. A faint streak across the doorframe, dark and almost oily. All subtle, all fleeting, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I reached out and touched the door. The wood was cold, slick from the fog, and beneath my fingers I thought I felt a vibration. Not a thrum from the earth, not from the truck, but something else. Something patient. Something waiting. My pulse quickened. I reminded myself, I've been through worse. Cabin calls, missing persons, break-ins, empty buildings with echoes, but this felt different. I slowly turned the handle. Locked. Good. Bad. I didn't know. I slid the bolt aside and pushed. The door creaked, protesting, and I hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough to feel the weight of the fog pressing against the cabin, pressing against me. Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and wet pine. Nothing else. Nothing immediately wrong. The furniture was arranged neatly, the rug flat on the floor. It looked normal, deceptively normal, and I had learned over the years that normal in these woods never was. I took a cautious step in, scanning the room. My eyes moved over every shadow, every corner, every flicker of darkness that didn't belong. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air seemed thicker here, heavier. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. I moved toward the kitchen first. The cupboards were closed. The stove cold. No signs of struggle. Nothing that screamed danger in the way a human would leave it. But the floor was damp and the footprints continued inside. Small, careful steps that led toward the back, toward the bedroom. I followed them. Each step was deliberate, careful. The boards groaned beneath my weight, but the sound felt too soft, as if the cabin itself swallowed noise. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the fog or the silence. It was the way the air felt alive, almost sentient, bending with intent. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. I could see the edge of the bed, blankets undisturbed. Nothing. But the footprints ended just before the door. No one there. No one. Just absence. And yet the feeling of presence was overwhelming. I swallowed hard. I reminded myself to breathe, focus. Logically, someone had been here. Maybe the woman had fled. Maybe there had been a break-in that left only shadows behind. But instinct doesn't care for logic. Instinct told me to be careful, to notice the little things. A chair slightly out of place, a smudge along the dresser, a faint indentation in the rug where someone might have knelt. I stepped closer to the bed. There was nothing under it, nothing behind it, and yet a cold pressure brushed the back of my neck. My spine stiffened. I spun around. The room was empty. Shadows stretched across the walls, pooling in the corners, flickering as the moonlight outside shifted behind clouds. But I wasn't imagining the movement. Shapes flickered, just at the edge of my vision, and each time I looked directly, they vanished. I tried to steady my breathing, focus on the details. Footprints, smudges, disturbances, nothing supernatural, but the feeling persisted. A patient, pressing awareness that I could neither see nor touch. Like the cabin itself was alive, and I had intruded into its careful watch. The fog outside moved through the cracks of the windows, curling along the floorboards, shifting the shadows. And then I saw it. A shape, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, slipping along the wall where light didn't reach. It moved like liquid, a shadow with intent almost human in gesture but wrong in form. My stomach dropped. My fingers clenched the pistol, but the shape didn't react. It just glided, patient, deliberate, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. I froze, heart hammering, breath shallow, tried to make sense of what I had seen. A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by isolation and exhaustion? Maybe. But the footprints inside the cabin, recent, damp, deliberate, told a different story. Someone or something had been here, and I knew instinctively, deeply, that I was not alone. I moved carefully, scanning every shadow, every corner. The air seemed thicker now, almost tactile, pressing against my skin. The floorboards creaked softly underfoot, though I tried to move silently. Each sound felt magnified. The fog pressing through the windows seemed to carry whispers, soft enough to doubt my ears. Strong enough to twist my gut, I reached the back wall and ran a hand along it. Nothing. Just the rough grain of old wood. But the cold followed me, creeping up my arm, up my neck, like the cabin exhaled, filling the room with its patient awareness. I felt the presence shift, move, but I couldn't see it, couldn't pinpoint it, only feel it, like a shadow brushing against the edge of reality. I stepped back toward the doorway, glancing one last time into the bedroom. The blankets remained undisturbed, the floorboards unbroken, and yet the air carried the faintest trace of movement, as if something had been there a moment ago and now was gone, leaving only the memory of presence. I forced myself to breathe. Focus on the details. Track the signs of life or human intrusion. The footprints, the smudges, the faint streak on the door frame. These were things I could document, things I could report. But what I couldn't document was the way the cabin felt alive, patient, and impossibly aware. I stepped back outside, fog curling around my boots, and looked at the cabin once more. Everything appeared normal again, quiet, still, yet the air hummed with tension. The shadows between the trees shifted, shapes that had been just at the edge of my vision flickered. And then in an instant, one of them moved fully into view, tall, impossible, blacker than the night around it, and then disappeared into the darkness beyond the clearing, leaving no trace, no footprint, no sound. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded. The fog seemed thicker now, curling in on itself, hiding secrets I could not name. I wanted to leave. I wanted to drive back to the warmth and safety of the truck, the lights of the highway, the human world. But something rooted me here. The cabin demanded acknowledgement, or perhaps it demanded witness, and I knew that leaving too quickly could be just as dangerous as staying. I glanced back inside, the shadows pooling in the corners, the subtle shifts in the dim moonlight. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet the memory of that impossible shadow lingered, as if it had left an imprint on the very air. My instincts screamed that it wasn't gone, that it was patient, waiting, always watching. I closed the door slowly, careful to lock it again. The cold streak along the doorframe pressed against my mind like a warning. I stepped back into the fog, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Every sense was on edge. Every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper of wind carried the memory of what had just been here. And as I watched the cabin recede into the fog, I realized one truth I couldn't deny. It didn't matter whether the cabin was empty or not. The forest, the fog, the shadows, all of it was alive, patient, observant, and we were intruders in its slow, deliberate world. I climbed back into the truck, hands still shaking slightly, eyes scanning the dark tree line. Every instinct told me that what I had seen, the footprints, the smudges, the shadow, was real. And that realization left a cold weight in my chest. The woods were patient, the cabin alive, and whatever had moved through it did not belong to the human world. I started the engine, fog curling over the hood, and for a moment, I dared to glance back. The clearing was empty, the cabin silent, but I knew the truth. Something had been here, something had waited, and somewhere, just beyond the edges of vision, it was still watching. The highway stretched ahead, black and empty, disappearing into the fog that had rolled in thick from nowhere. My headlights cut weak slices through the mist, illuminating the edges of the road and the occasional reflective sign that blinked like a warning. I gripped the wheel a little tighter, though the truck hummed beneath me like it had a mind of its own. The radio was dead static tonight, nothing but the hiss and crackle that pressed against the quiet. Perfect night for a patrol. I passed mile markers, each one like a heartbeat in the darkness, counting off the minutes I'd been driving these roads alone. Usually the emptiness didn't bother me, but tonight it pressed in. The fog seemed alive, curling around the edges of the road, clinging to the trees like it wanted to reach inside the truck and brush against my skin. I slowed slightly as I rounded a bend. Up ahead on the shoulder I saw a figure. A lone hitchhiker, thumb raised, coat dark, face obscured by the fog. My gut tightened. Late-night hitchhikers weren't unusual, but something about this one made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They weren't moving like a normal person, not really. Just standing there perfectly still, framed by the headlights, watching. I eased the truck over and slowed to a crawl. "You need a ride?" I called through the window. The figure didn't move, didn't answer. Just stared, empty, still. A frozen silhouette against the gray fog. I squinted, trying to make out features. Couldn't. Every time I thought I got a clear look, the figure seemed to blur, edges melting slightly into the mist. My pulse quickened, I rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in, damp and sharp. I leaned closer. "Hey, you okay? Need help?" Nothing. Just the faint rustle of the fog brushing against the roadside. I looked away for a split second, just to glance at the rearview mirror, check the road behind me, and when I looked back, the hitchhiker was gone. I slammed the brakes lightly, heart hammering. My headlights scanned the shoulder. Nothing. No footprints, no coat, no figure. Just fog curling around the trees. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. I had been driving these roads for years. I knew how fog played tricks. I knew how the mind could see movement in shadows. But this felt different. I eased forward slowly, eyes darting to the roadside. Every curve, every patch of fog seemed to twist in on itself. And then again, there they were. Same spot, same stillness. Same unreadable presence. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe exhaustion, but no. The figure didn't waver. Didn't fade like a shadow, it just waited, watching, patient. I slowed and pulled over to the shoulder. My boots hit the wet asphalt as I stepped out, fog curling around my ankles. The night was silent, save for the distant hum of the truck. I scanned the shoulder, eyes straining, hands gripping the pistol I never left holstered. Nothing, just mist. And yet I felt it, the presence. Standing just beyond where I could see, watching, breathing, waiting. I told myself it was a person. Could be someone stranded, scared. Could be a prank, though few dared these roads at this hour. But instinct whispered something older, deeper, something that didn't belong. I stepped closer, cautious, eyes sweeping the fog. No sign of life. No coat, no boots, no human warmth. The road behind me stretched empty, black and glistening. I felt my pulse in my throat, the blood in my ears. Something wasn't right. Something was here, and it wasn't just fog or shadows. I glanced back toward the truck. Headlights cut weak arcs into the night, fog curling around the wheels like smoke. And then, for just a moment, I swore I saw movement at the edge of the beams. A flicker, too quick to be a person, but there it was. I spun, heart hammering, searching the shoulder. Nothing. Fog swallowed it whole. And then I heard it. Footsteps? Faint, light, almost inhuman in pace, coming from behind the trees, then stopping, waiting, not walking away, just there. Pausing patient, I called out again, voice steady but low. "Hello? You need help? Anyone there?" Silence. Then a faint rustle. Nothing concrete, just a shifting of air, like the fog itself had moved. And then, gone. Completely. I checked the road again. Nothing. I forced myself to calm down. Focus. Think rationally. Hitchhiker could have gotten scared, run into the trees, hidden. Could be someone playing a joke. Could be anything. But instinct had a way of cutting through all that, and mine screamed at me that this was not ordinary. I walked the shoulder slowly, each step deliberate, eyes scanning the fog for any hint, any trace. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though it clung to my skin, breathing along with me. I could feel my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every shadow looked wrong, stretched too long, leaning toward me. Every sound, distant wind, dripping water, rustle of leaves, echoed with a subtle menace. Then I froze. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I turned my head, and there they were, right at the edge of the fog just outside the reach of the headlights, watching, still, silent, unmoving. My stomach dropped. I blinked, looked away, and when I looked back, they were gone. Just like that. Nothing but fog curling along the roadside. My pulse raced. My hands shook slightly. I felt the weight of the night pressing in. The emptiness wasn't empty. Not really. Something was out there, watching, waiting, patient. I took a step back toward the truck. Fog swirled around my legs, damp, cold, insistent. I climbed inside, door closing with a soft click. Engine on. Headlights piercing the mist again. Heart still hammering. I told myself to calm down. It was just a late-night hitchhiker, or maybe just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I pulled back onto the highway, eyes scanning the foggy shoulder. Every bend, every shadow, every flicker of darkness made me tense, ready. The figure didn't reappear immediately, and that only made the silence heavier. The absence of something visible felt like a presence in itself, pushing against me, pressing at the edges of my awareness. I drove slowly, scanning every reflective sign, every tree line. And then I thought I saw it again, just a flicker at the edge of the fog, a shadow that didn't belong. I blinked. Gone. Just gone. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, empty, silent, except for the hum of the engine and my own breathing. But the weight of the figure lingered in my mind, patient, watching, waiting. It had no name, no shape I could hold on to, just a presence that brushed the edges of the road, the fog, and my perception. I forced myself to focus on the patrol. Miles to go, hours to cover. Rules to follow, logs to write. But every bend of the road, every curve hidden in fog, made me glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that impossible silhouette standing in the mist, half hoping I wouldn't. And I knew, with a certainty that made my chest tighten, that it wasn't just a hitchhiker. It wasn't human. It wasn't real, at least not in any way that obeyed the laws of the world. And yet, it was there, patient, waiting, watching. The night stretched on, endless, unyielding, and every mile I drove felt like a test, a game. And I wasn't sure who or what was keeping score. The fog rolled in like a tide, thick and unnatural, curling over the asphalt and climbing into the treetops. 1 minute, the road ahead was clear, stretching straight into the night. The next, it disappeared completely, swallowed by gray that moved as if alive. I slowed the truck, headlights cutting weak, trembling arcs into the mist, but it felt futile. The fog pressed against the glass, the mirrors, the hood, curling and twisting as if it had a will of its own. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Fog. Cold night. Moisture in the air. Nothing more. But instinct has a way of cutting through reason, and mine screamed. Something was off. Too thick, too quiet, too purposeful. The highway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of black cutting through gray that shifted and wavered. Every mile marker, every reflective sign, seemed to lean closer than it should. The trees at the shoulder appeared to tilt, branches arching inward as if to peer through the fog at me. The air smelled damp, of pine and earth, but beneath it there was another scent, something acrid, faintly metallic. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. I flicked on the radio, static, buzzing, no music, no voices, only the hiss like whispers trapped in the wires. I adjusted the volume, hoping for a signal, anything. But the fog swallowed it too, or perhaps there was nothing out here to receive. The world felt smaller, condensed, as if the fog had condensed everything into a bubble around me. A sound broke the monotony, soft, faint, indistinct, like footsteps or maybe nails dragging across asphalt. I froze, eyes scanning the fog. Nothing. Heart hammering, I eased forward, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the night, a combination of wind and imagination. But the sound persisted. Slow, deliberate, echoing in a way that made the distance impossible to judge. I reached down and checked the dash clock. Just past midnight. No traffic. No other cars. No chance for another person to have been here. Yet the sound came again. Faint, impossible to locate, always just outside the reach of my headlights. I gripped the wheel tighter. Tried to focus on the road. Tried to anchor myself in logic. Focus on the asphalt, the dividing lines, the faint reflective markers. But the fog shifted again, curling and twisting, as though it had a mind, a purpose, a patient awareness. Another sound, higher this time, like a whisper carried through the mist. Almost human, almost a laugh, and then silence. That kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature. No wind, no rustle, no hum of the truck. Just nothing. And in that nothing, I could feel eyes on me. Not human eyes. Something older. Patient. Watching. I slowed further, nearly stopped, scanning the shoulder. Trees leaned close, fog curling around their roots like fingers. Every shadow looked wrong, stretched unnaturally. Every flicker of movement at the edge of vision made me tense. I told myself repeatedly, it's just fog. Just isolation. Just exhaustion. But the feeling persisted, thick, heavy, a pressure pressing against my chest, slowing my breath. I remembered the last time I'd driven this road late at night. A deer darting across, a rustle in the underbrush. Ordinary things, predictable, comfortable. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't comfortable. The fog had a quality to it that seemed almost alive, a will, a presence. The footsteps, or whatever they were, continued. Echoing just behind the trees, bouncing off nothing. I tried to track them, but each time I turned toward the sound, it shifted. Not moving naturally, not walking. Moving like a predator that knows you're watching. Teasing you, patient, deliberate. I forced myself to breathe. Keep calm. Keep the truck on the road. Keep moving. The fog made it impossible to judge speed, distance. Every tree looked identical. Every curve in the asphalt folded in on itself. I had the sudden creeping sensation that I was driving in circles, though I knew I wasn't. The markers should have confirmed it. They did not. Another sound. Closer. Or was it further? Impossible to tell. Footsteps? A soft scrape like nails against metal? I slammed the brakes lightly. My pulse thundered in my ears. Headlights scanned the roadside. Nothing. And yet the sensation persisted. Something there. Watching. Waiting. Patient. I flicked the lights high and low, hoping to catch movement. Trees leaned, shadows shifted, fog twisted. Nothing solid. But in the corner of my vision, shapes flitted, impossible and fast. Like smoke condensed into form. I blinked. Gone. The mind wants to rationalize. My mind screamed that I shouldn't try. That some things aren't meant to be rationalized. I remembered a call I had answered years ago. A hiker lost in thick fog. Panicked. Disoriented. But this wasn't fog. This was deliberate. Alive. The memory pressed against my chest. The hiker had described things moving just beyond sight. I had laughed then, dismissing it as fear. Now my own blood chilled. I tried to call dispatch, phone pressed to my ear. Signal weak, buzzing, words garbled. Static that seemed to hiss faintly, almost intelligible, as if someone or something was speaking just out of reach. I hung up. No help out here. Alone. Miles from the last checkpoint. Only the fog. Only the highway. Only... A sudden rustle behind the trees. A flicker of movement. A shadow that didn't belong. My throat tightened. I forced my eyes to track it, but the fog swallowed it. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, heart hammering. Something was here. Something that didn't belong. Something patient. I reminded myself to breathe. One step at a time. 1 mile at a time. Keep the truck steady. Keep moving. But the fog seemed to press closer with each breath. Dense. Saturated. Moving in ways that made no sense. Each curve I drove through felt longer than it should. Each stretch of road seemed to fold back on itself, trapping me in a corridor of gray. Another sound. Footsteps again. Slower this time. deliberate, echoing in a rhythm that made no sense. Too heavy to be human, too soft to be natural. Behind me, beside me, impossible to tell. Every instinct screamed to stop, to look, to turn the truck, but I couldn't. Something demanded I keep going. Patient, testing, waiting. The smell shifted. Damp pine, earth, and now faintly metallic, coppery. Like blood, though I saw none. My chest tightened. Breath shallow. Eyes scanning every shadow, every movement at the edge of the headlights. Shapes flitted, impossible, intangible. Always at the corner of my vision. Always gone when I looked directly. I forced myself to focus on the lines of the asphalt, the reflective markers, anything concrete. But the fog twisted, curling over them, stretching, making them seem distant, unreachable. My mind played tricks. The highway felt wrong, endless, circular. I knew it wasn't, but the fog suggested otherwise. Then silence. No footsteps. No whispers, no rustle. Only the hum of the engine and my ragged breathing. Relief hit, brief and fleeting. And then, just behind me, a soft movement in the fog. A shadow, too tall, too thin. Moving impossibly. Watching. Patient. I swerved slightly, heart hammering, eyes scanning. Nothing, only fog, curling like smoke. But the impression remained. Something had been there. Something had followed me. Something had waited. I gripped the wheel, sweat running down my neck, pulse racing. The fog stretched on endlessly. Highway disappearing into gray that pressed against my headlights. Shadows twisted at the edges, impossible and patient. And I knew with a certainty that left my stomach cold that I was not alone. The rest of the night would stretch long. Endless miles of fog, shadows, and waiting. And every mile, every second, would remind me of one truth I could not deny. Some things are patient. Some things are alive. And some things watch you, just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for the moment you finally realize you are theirs. I slowed the truck to a crawl as I neared the hitchhiker again. The fog had thickened even more, pressing against the headlights like a living thing, curling around the edges of the road and the trees, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. My pulse thumped in my ears, the only sound that felt real. The figure stood on the shoulder, perfectly still. The coat clung to them in the damp air, edges wet and dark. I squinted, trying to make out a face. Couldn't. Every time I thought I got a look, it seemed to blur, melting into the fog. My mind tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, stress, tricks of the light. But instinct cut through it. This wasn't ordinary. I eased the truck to the shoulder and cut the engine. The hum of the tires faded, leaving only the press of silence. It was heavy, almost tangible. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into wet asphalt. Fog curled around my ankles, thick and damp, like it wanted to reach inside my clothes. "Hey," I called softly, keeping my voice calm. "You need a ride? You're out here late." Nothing. Just that unnerving stillness. The figure didn't shift, didn't breathe audibly, didn't blink. I forced myself to step closer, scanning the mist, searching for any sign that they were human, that they had a pulse, that they could respond. I noticed then a subtle detail. Footprints, or the lack of them. The shoulder was damp, mud soft in patches, and yet there were no prints leading to the figure. None at all. The fog, I realized, seemed to cling to them, curling around their legs, swallowing the ground beneath, erasing evidence of presence. "Hey," I tried again. "Can I help you?" The whisper of the wind was the only reply, but it carried something else. Faint, almost a tone, a low vibration in the air like a pulse that wasn't mine. My stomach twisted. I gripped the pistol at my side without thinking, though I knew the real threat wasn't human. Not in the way I could handle with a gun. I stepped closer. The figure remained motionless, patient, almost expectant. And then I blinked, just for a fraction of a second. When my eyes reopened, they were gone. Gone. I froze, scanning the fog. Nothing. The air pressed against me, damp and cold, carrying the faintest scent, metallic, sharp, faintly sweet. It lingered in my nostrils, clinging to my clothes. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. My pulse raced. I wanted to call out again, wanted to step into the fog and find them, but instinct screamed not to. This presence wasn't something human. It wasn't rational. It was patient, observant. I scanned the roadside. No footprints. No movement, only fog curling around the shoulder, thick and dense. Every shadow seemed heavier, darker. Every flicker of gray looked like a form, shifting, watching. I thought back to the first time I had seen them. Earlier on the highway, just a silhouette, alone, waiting, watching. And now, nothing. Only a memory of presence. A hint of it that pressed at my awareness, lingering in the cold night air. I forced myself to focus. Footprints, markings, signs of human presence. There should have been some. None. The absence screamed louder than any sound could. My hands shook slightly, though I tried to hide it. The fog had a weight to it, wrapping around me, curling into my hair, filling my nostrils. It felt alive. I climbed back into the truck slowly, keeping eyes on the shoulder, scanning every shadow, every flicker. My heartbeat rattled in my ears. Engine on. Headlights slicing weak paths into the mist. The highway stretched ahead, black and infinite. And yet I felt eyes at the edge of vision, always just beyond the reach of light. I thought I caught it again. Movement at the corner of my vision. A flicker taller than human, unnaturally still, then gone. Not a trick of the headlights, not a shadow from the trees. Something deliberate. Something patient, watching, waiting. I drove slowly, every mile a test. The fog pressed against the windshield, against the mirrors, curling into every crack and seam of the truck. The road stretched endlessly. Every mile felt elongated, warped, like the fog had rewritten reality itself. I tried to shake it off. It was just a hitchhiker, just fog, just exhaustion, but nothing in my experience felt like this. The air had a pulse. The fog moved deliberately. The shadows had intent, and in my gut I knew the figure wasn't gone. Not really. It was patient, always watching. I thought about turning around, going back to where I first saw them, but the rational part of me warned, some things don't like being followed. Some things wait. Some things are not bound by time or space in ways we understand. The road ahead twisted. A curve, then another. The fog thickened, curling over the asphalt like smoke, concealing the dividing lines. Every tree leaned in, branches reaching, shadows pooling beneath. And somewhere in that gray, I felt it again. Presence. Patient. Waiting. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Headlights reflected back at me through fog, blacker than they should have been. And then, just for a heartbeat, I saw the silhouette, at the edge of the mist. Not moving, watching. I blinked. Gone. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. Breath shallow. My mind raced through possibilities. Human trick. Hallucination. Stress. Fog playing games with perception. All rational explanations. But rationality didn't erase the weight of awareness pressing against my chest. Didn't erase the sense of being observed by something older, patient, and deliberate. I forced myself to focus on details. Road, lines, signs, trees, anything to anchor reality. The fog twisted, but the road was still there. Still asphalt beneath my tires, still direction to follow. Still human laws that bound the highway. But the presence that remained always at the edges, flickering, patient, impossible. Another sound, soft, faint, almost like breath, or the scraping of nails. Behind me, beside me, impossible to locate. My pulse thundered in my ears. I eased forward, slow, careful, fog curling, wrapping, pressing, shadows flickering at the edges of perception. And then I saw it. Just at the corner of the fog, a flash of movement, tall, dark, leaning in impossible angles. Not human, not animal, something deliberate. And then impossibly, it vanished. Gone. But the air still hummed with it. Heavy, watching, patient. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep into my lungs. The truck's engine hummed beneath me, comforting and inadequate at once. I forced rational thought, hitchhiker gone. Mist playing tricks, nothing tangible left. And yet, the knowledge that the presence remained weighed on me. Pressed against me, I drove on slowly. Every mile a test, every shadow a challenge to sanity. The fog rolled endlessly. The highway stretched into gray infinity. And all the while, I felt it. Patient, deliberate, waiting. At some point, I stopped thinking about finding them. The figure, the silhouette, the impossible shape at the edge of vision. It wasn't meant to be found. It had appeared, had made its presence known, and then vanished, leaving only the chill of awareness, the metallic sweet trace in the air, the undeniable sense that I was being watched. I thought about calling it in, telling dispatch, describing the figure, the fog, the shapes that flickered and vanished. But words would fail. Description would fail. Reality would fail to contain it. All that remained was memory and instinct and the pressing weight of the night. The highway stretched on, black and unbroken, fog curling like smoke, shadows pooling, shapes flickering, always at the edge, always patient, waiting. I swallowed hard and kept driving. Not toward anything, not away from anything, just moving. The memory of the figure, impossible and patient, pressed against me, reminding me that some things are not bound by roads, time, or reason. Some things wait, and I knew, deep in my gut, that this wasn't over. Not tonight. Not ever. The night shift in a hospital is a different kind of quiet. Not the comforting quiet of empty streets or a library at midnight, but a sharp, hollow quiet that presses against your skull. Every creak of a door, every hum of machinery, every soft footstep echoes louder than it should. And at 3 a.m., it feels like the walls themselves are listening. I was sitting at the 911 dispatch console, headphones snug over my ears, coffee cold at my side. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, flickering occasionally, casting brief shadows that crawled along the walls. I had just settled into the monotony of logs and check-ins when the line clicked. "Women, what's your emergency?" My voice sounded steady, professional, but the knot in my stomach had been growing all night. "Hello? I think someone is in the West Wing. They shouldn't be here." The voice trembled. A woman, probably in her 20s, judging by the tone. Her breathing was uneven, soft sobs hidden behind polite words. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" I asked, fingers hovering over the console. "Are you a patient?" No, I'm the night nurse. Or I was. I'm checking rounds and I don't know, I think someone is walking the halls. In the closed wing. It's 3 a.m. Everything's locked down and she cut herself off with a sharp intake of breath. I leaned forward, instincts tightening. A hospital at night is a different world. The corridors twist and echo. Closed wings feel like a tomb after hours. And anyone wandering those halls alone, especially someone who isn't supposed to be there, makes every nerve scream. "Stay calm," I said. "I'm dispatch. Can you tell me exactly where you are?" She hesitated. "Floor 3, the West Wing, near the old ICU. I saw someone walking, but they weren't normal. They moved. Wrong, slowly, quiet, and they keep vanishing into the shadows. Every time I blink, they're gone." I frowned, trying to visualize the layout. West Wing, 3rd floor. Closed for renovations for the past month. Lights mostly off. Alarms disabled for maintenance. No patients officially allowed. But there was someone or something moving in there. "Okay," I said. "I'm sending a unit now. Do not try to confront them. Keep a distance. Can you see them right now?" "Yes, I think just at the end of the hall. Near the double doors. I can't see clearly. Every time I take a step closer, they vanish. It's like they're not really there. But I hear footsteps, slow, patient, and the shadow. I don't know. It doesn't feel human." My stomach turned. Dispatching calls like this is one thing. Thinking of what the responders will encounter, alone in a dark, empty hospital wing, is another. But I knew the protocol. Stay calm, collect details, and get help moving. Help is on the way. Stay on the line with me. Keep away from the hallway if you can. Lock yourself in the nurse's station if needed. Can you do that? Yes, I'll try, she whispered. But every time I look down the hall, it's like the walls are breathing. And the floor? The floor creaks. Not where anyone should be walking. And I feel watched, like someone or something is counting my breaths. I swallowed hard. That last part wasn't something you hear often. People say, "I feel watched," but the way she said it, it was hollow, empty, almost as if the presence was so patient that it could be felt in the bones. "Okay," I said. "Keep talking to me." Tell me exactly what you see. Don't move toward it. Describe everything. The floor, the walls, doors, lights, sounds, everything. She cleared her throat. The hallway, long, narrow, lights flickering occasionally. Shadows stretch along the walls. Nothing human moves there. But the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and I see shapes in the fog of the old dust. They vanish when I focus on them. I swear, they vanish when I blink. And the shadow it's wrong. Limbs too long, posture unnatural. Watching me, I forced myself to breathe. Not panic, not yet. Everything pointed to fear, stress, hallucinations. But this was a hospital, third floor, closed wing, alone in the night. People didn't normally report shadows with unnatural limbs unless there was something else. How close are they? I asked, voice steady, calm. I can't tell. One moment at the end of the hall, the next closer, the next gone entirely. I can hear them though, breathing or footsteps. Not human, not like anything I can explain. I jotted notes, fingers shaking slightly. The call log would reflect routine, but my gut told me this wasn't routine. This was something else. Something patient, deliberate, waiting. Stay where you are. Keep talking to me. Can you describe the doors along the hall? She hesitated, swallowing audibly. Double doors. Old ICU, wood warped, paint peeling. Every time I look down, it's like the door shifts slightly. Not fully, just wrong, like the hall itself. Stretches, bends, and the shadow, it moves through it without opening the doors. I felt a chill. Hospitals are predictable. Lines, doors, walls, floors. But the way she described it, stretching, bending, it wasn't natural. I see it again, she whispered. Standing near the last bay, watching, patient. I blinked and it was closer. And now, gone again. But I feel it. Breathing, waiting, counting my breaths. I tried to keep my voice calm. Keep the doors locked. Keep yourself hidden. Don't move. Help is on the way. Can you stay there? Yes. She cut herself off. A soft gasp. I could hear her take a step back. A door creak. The line went quiet for a second. Then a soft, low sound, almost imperceptible. Something brushing against the floor, echoing faintly down the hallway. Stay there. Do not move toward it, I shouted, though my voice felt weak in the headphones. The woman whispered, trembling. I can't see it, but it's right there. I can feel it, patient, waiting, counting. Me, I typed rapidly. Dispatch code alert, units notified. Help is moving in. Can you stay in the station? Keep the door closed? Yes, she stammered. But her voice was faint, shaking, almost swallowed by the fog of the night. Every time I breathe, I hear it. Slow, deliberate, patient. I can feel its eyes on me, though it shouldn't have any. It's wrong. All wrong. I forced myself to stay calm. Keep your voice steady. Keep breathing. Help is almost there. Can you see the hallway from where you are? Just a little. But the shadow, it moves through walls, bends through light. I can't explain. It's waiting, patient, always watching. The line was thick with tension, static creeping in as the fog, or whatever it was, pressed against the hospital. My pulse was loud in my ears. Every instinct screamed that the woman was not imagining this. Something unnatural, patient, deliberate, was moving in that closed wing, and it wasn't afraid. It was waiting. Help is close, I said, even as my stomach twisted. Stay calm. Stay hidden. Keep talking to me. I can hear it moving behind the stations now. Closer, patient, counting. Her voice broke, trembling. And then, just for a moment, a faint echo of static, low and almost intelligent, whispered through the line. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep. Hospitals at 3 a.m. are full of shadows, echoes, mistakes, fear. But this was patient. This was deliberate, waiting, observing, counting, not human, not natural. And I knew, with the cold certainty of instinct, that nothing alive in that hospital would follow rules. And in the silence that followed, I understood. Some things are patient, some things wait, and some things watch you long after you think you're safe. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and decay. Cold fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting weak, uneven illumination down the long corridor. Every step I took echoed, sharp and hollow, bouncing off walls that seemed to stretch endlessly. The fog of unease in my chest was heavier than any physical weight I had ever carried. I had been called to the ER for a routine check, someone wandering in the closed wings, but the moment I stepped past the double doors, something shifted. The usual buzz of machines, the faint hum of ventilation, even the distant murmur of staff had all been swallowed. Silence stretched in every direction, thick and unnatural, pressing against my ears. The first thing I noticed was the flickering lights. One bulb overhead dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, like a heartbeat gone wrong. Shadows pooled beneath it, dark and restless. I stepped cautiously, keeping my hand near my sidearm, though I knew this wasn't human I was after. Not yet, but the instinct to protect, to anticipate danger, is hardwired, and I couldn't silence it. A sound reached me then, a soft shuffle from the far end of the hallway, distant, slow, measured. My pulse quickened. I froze, straining to hear. It wasn't loud enough to be a person walking, not really, not human. The echo carried too cleanly, too deliberately. Each step, or whatever it was, seemed to reach into the hallway, curling around corners, pressing against the walls. I forced myself forward, footstep by footstep, careful, deliberate. Every breath I drew felt loud in the emptiness. My mind tried to anchor itself to reason. Maybe a janitor. Maybe a machine rattling loose in the distance. But the instinct in my gut told me none of that applied tonight. The hallway stretched endlessly, or at least it felt that way. I could see the doors to rooms, peeling paint on the frames, little patches of rust on handles. Each room seemed frozen in time, beds still made, sheets folded, charts stacked neatly. No sign of life, and yet I felt eyes. Not human eyes, cold, patient, watching, waiting. Another flicker of the light overhead, and the shadows shifted. Not naturally, not like the light was causing them to bend. They moved with intent, curling, stretching as if they were alive, independent of physics. I blinked, and they returned to their original place. But the sensation remained. The feeling that something was moving just out of reach, just beyond the edge of sight. I stepped closer to the end of the hall. The sound came again, faint, deliberate. Shuffle, pause. A soft scraping, like nails against linoleum. Echoed, distorted, rebounding from corners and walls. I told myself it was my imagination, but my own heartbeat mocked that idea, thumping in my ears with anxious insistence. The floor beneath my boots felt colder than it should. The tiles slick, almost damp. I glanced down. Nothing. No footprints. No sign anyone had been here in hours. The fog of unease pressed against me like a living thing, curling into my clothes, brushing against my neck. I thought of the 911 call, the nurse trembling on the line. Patient wandering the closed wing, she had said. I had assumed an ordinary mistake. Someone lost. Someone confused, but now I realized she had been right in ways I didn't want to admit. This was not ordinary. The hall itself seemed wrong, another sound. Behind me this time, soft, careful, precise. I spun, but the hallway stretched empty. Lights flickered. Shadows pooled. Nothing moved. Nothing alive, at least in ways I recognized. And yet, I felt it. Patient. Waiting. Observing. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to retreat, to run. But my legs refused. They moved forward instead. I reached the first double doors that led to the old ICU. Closed, locked, paint peeling, wood warped. And yet, the shadows at the edges of the doorway shifted. Stretching, curling, like smoke pressed into form. I leaned closer, careful, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating nothing tangible. But the feeling, the presence, remained. Watching. Patient. A soft click behind me made me spin again. Nothing. Only the flicker of a distant light reflected along the polished linoleum. But I knew it wasn't nothing. Something had moved. Or had been there and vanished. Either way, it was deliberate, observant, patient. I forced myself to breathe. Focus on the details. The walls, scuffed paint, peeling edges. The floor, clean but cold. Polished enough to reflect the lights, yet wet enough to feel damp under my boots. The doors, closed, unyielding, mundane. And yet, wrong. All wrong. Another shuffle. Fainter this time, almost imperceptible. To my left, a shadow stretched along the wall, long, impossible, bending around the corner. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. But the instinct in my chest screamed. Something was there, waiting, observing, patient. I walked slowly, deliberate, every step measured. My reflection in the linoleum glinted back at me, distorted, tall and stretched. For a moment I swore it moved independently, tilted its head, blinking, watching. My pulse spiked, but my voice remained quiet. "Hello?" I whispered. "Anyone there?" Silence. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights flickering softly. The shadows shifted again. I could feel it pressing against me, the presence. Not human, not alive in ways we recognize. Patient, waiting, counting. Every breath I took, it noted. Every step, it followed. I thought of retreat, of calling for backup, of retreating to the safety of the nurse's station. But the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, folding in on itself, shadows pooling in impossible corners. I forced myself to move forward. Step by step, footstep by footstep, another flicker of the lights overhead. And there, at the far end of the hallway, just a shadow, darker than the rest, shifting, stretching, bending in impossible angles. I blinked, gone, just like that. But the sensation, patient, waiting, observing. I forced rational thought. Floor, lines, doors, lights, anchors of reality. But the hallway refused to obey logic. The shadows bent. The light flickered. Every corner stretched, warped, hiding something. Something deliberate. Something patient. The echo of distant footsteps returned. Faint, deliberate, almost inhuman. Behind, ahead, beside me, I couldn't tell. The sound pressed against my ears, bouncing off the walls, layering itself into the space. And always, always that presence. Watching, patient, counting. I remembered the nurse's words from the call. "It's counting me. Patient, waiting, observing." I swallowed hard. My pulse thundered. The fog of unease in my chest pressed against me, curling into my lungs. It was alive, that presence. Not a person. Not human. Patient. Calculating. I forced myself to focus on concrete details again. Walls, floors, lights, doors, anchors. But the shadows at the edges of vision moved independent of any logic. Shapes shifted. Impossible forms bent, twisted, disappeared. And I knew instinctively that they were watching. Patient. Waiting. Another shuffle. Closer. Or further. Impossible to tell. The sound echoed in ways that shouldn't be possible. My own heartbeat joined the rhythm, erratic, pounding. I forced breath deep, counting, grounding myself. Step, step, step. Footstep by footstep, and then the silence. Thick, heavy, pressing, only the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. And in that silence, I could feel it. Watching, patient, waiting. Always there at the edge of sight, in the corners of perception. I forced myself to move step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, knowing that some things in the hallway are patient. That some things watch you long before you notice them. I swallowed, forcing rational thought, forcing calm. But the memory of shadows, flickering lights, impossible shapes, and those soft, deliberate footsteps pressed against my skull. And I knew with a cold certainty that this hallway was not empty. Not really. Something waited. Something patient. Something that counted every step I took. The key turned in the lock with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have in the deadened silence of the hallway. Room 306, third floor, west wing. The part of the hospital closed for renovations, officially empty. But the call had been clear, and the nurse's voice still rang in my ears. Someone had been here. Walking the halls, patient wandering in the closed wing, I pushed the door open slowly, flashlight cutting a weak path through the dim light, and stepped inside. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, carrying that faint metallic tang that always makes you swallow hard, even when there's no obvious cause. The bed was made, sheets neatly tucked, pillow fluffed just so. Everything looked normal at first glance. ordinary. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. I paused, flashlight sweeping the room. Something was off. Too perfect, too still. The desk by the window had a patient chart stacked neatly, pen lying beside it as though it had been placed there with deliberate care. A cup on the bedside table, still half full, but the surface of the liquid was perfectly calm, as if untouched for hours. But the condensation along the rim suggested otherwise. Someone had been here moments ago. I stepped closer to the bed, footsteps soft on the polished floor echoing faintly. The sheets were undisturbed, yet the room carried an almost tangible presence, a lingering weight that pressed against my chest. I could feel it in the air, like the space itself remembered. Someone had been here. Someone or something. The flashlight beam settled on the chair by the window. Patient belongings, bag, jacket, slippers neatly placed beneath the bed, arranged as if the person had stepped out for a moment and planned to return. I swallowed hard. Nothing moved now. Nothing alive in ways I could perceive. And yet, the room hummed with anticipation, patient, deliberate. I moved to the desk, crouching slightly to inspect the chart. The handwriting was neat, precise, clinical, but the chart itself felt wrong. Not because of its contents, but because of the energy in the room, like the walls themselves were leaning in to watch me. And the shadow along the corner of the ceiling twisted ever so slightly, though no light source could explain it. Footsteps, or the memory of them, brushed at the edges of perception. Not loud, not human, but present. I turned sharply, sweeping the flashlight around the room. Shadows flickered across the ceiling and walls, stretching, bending, impossible angles that defied logic. The air pressed in against me, damp, cold, carrying that faint metallic scent again. I approached the bedside table, keeping movement slow, deliberate. The cup, half full, still. But I could swear I saw the surface ripple as though someone had leaned over it, breathed on it, then stepped away. My pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that I was not alone, and yet my eyes saw no one. I stepped to the corner, flashlight catching the closet door. Closed, the handle polished by use, yet untouched tonight. The faintest shift in the shadows made my breath catch. Something moved, or had moved. Patient, deliberate, waiting, counting. The bed. I checked again. Sheets pristine. Pillow fluffed. No signs of struggle, but something lingered. A sense of expectation, like the patient or whatever had been here was about to return. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the room, flashlight sweeping, ears straining for the softest sound. Footsteps, perhaps just beyond perception, brushing at the edge of my awareness. I stepped closer to the desk again. The chart. Patient information. Room 306, officially empty. But the energy in the room told another story. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching, arranging, planning. The shadow along the far wall twisted again, just slightly, a flicker of movement that I could not rationalize. The window. Moonlight slipped through, weak, pale, casting slivers of silver across the floor. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching impossibly long, bending around edges. I felt the air thicken, heavy with something patient, deliberate, breathing, waiting, not human, not natural. I approached the window, careful, flashlight scanning the room. Nothing. Nothing alive. Yet the room hummed. Energy, presence, the feeling of being counted, observed, measured. Footsteps, or memories of footsteps, soft on the polished floor. Scrape of nails? Impossible to tell. I froze, held my breath. The air seemed to press closer, curling into the small of my back, into the hollow of my chest. I stepped toward the bed again, slippers beneath, jacket draped over the chair, everything positioned as if someone had been here a moment ago. I glanced at the chart again. Patient's name, date of birth, vital signs last recorded, but someone had been here since then. The room whispered it to me, pressed it into my awareness, patient, waiting, a faint sound. Almost imperceptible. A shuffle behind the bed. I turned, flashlight sweeping. Nothing, only shadows, twisting, curling, impossible angles. The air carried that metallic tang again, sharp, faintly sweet. lingering in my nose. The hairs on my neck rose. I crouched slightly, examining the floor. No footprints. No sign of movement. Nothing tangible. And yet, the arrangement of the room, the presence in the air, the subtle, almost imperceptible energy, it told me everything. Someone or something had been here, and it had left just as suddenly, deliberately, leaving only hints. I stood, heartbeat loud in my ears, and moved to the corner near the closet. The shadows stretched along the ceiling, bending around the edges. I could feel it pressing against me, patient, observing, waiting, counting my breaths. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I glanced again at the desk. Pen still on the chart, cup still half full, but the air moved differently now, heavier, denser, as if the room itself remembered the presence, replayed it silently in the corners of vision. I forced rational thought. Empty room, no one here, logic, reality, anchors, and yet the feeling remained, persistent, patient. I walked slowly around the bed, each step deliberate, careful. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision, curling like smoke. I could feel it, the presence, pressing closer, though I could see nothing. Not human, not natural. Waiting, patient, observing, counting. The window again, moonlight weak and silvery. Shadows deep, impossible, curling around edges of furniture. The room hummed softly, a vibration beneath the skin in the chest, a low frequency that made the hairs on my arms rise. I crouched near the chair, jacket draped over it, slippers beneath, cup on bedside table, sheet on bed. Nothing disturbed. Yet, everything spoke. The placement of items, the energy, the lingering scent in the air. Someone or something had been here, and left in a way meant to unsettle. I straightened, moving slowly back to the doorway, flashlight cutting across the room, sweeping shadows. No movement, nothing alive. But the air pressed against me, cold, metallic, patient, waiting, observing, counting. I walked down the hallway, flashlight cutting through the dim, flickering light. Footsteps faint behind me, or echoes of footsteps, memories embedded in the floor, the walls. Room 306, empty yet full of hints, of energy, of a patient, deliberate presence that defied explanation. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that it was not gone. Not truly. Patient, watching, waiting, always counting. And somewhere in the depths of that still, quiet, impossible room, it lingered. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel into nothing. Fluorescent lights flickering weakly, casting shadows that bent at impossible angles. My boots echoed softly on the linoleum, but underneath it all, beneath the normal creaks of an old hospital, I could hear something else. Low murmurs, whispers, at first subtle, then rising, threading through the hum of the air. I paused, hand on the door frame, straining to hear. The voices weren't real, or at least not entirely. One moment I thought I recognized the tone, a nurse calling a patient, soft, familiar. The next, it twisted into something jagged, alien, impossible. They layered on top of each other, overlapping, coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was disorienting. A chorus of echoes that pressed against my mind. "Hello?" I called, voice careful, steady, though my chest felt tight. Silence answered. Then, just at the edge of hearing, a faint sigh. Almost human. Almost. I swallowed, forcing breath deep. Focus. Anchor yourself. But the instinct to flee pressed against me, and my pulse was a hammer in my ears. I moved slowly down the corridor, flashlight slicing through the dim light. Every step stretched the space. The hallway seemed to lengthen unnaturally, the walls leaning inward, curling slightly as though breathing. The whispers followed, curling around me, brushing against the ears, teasing the edges of perception. Each syllable sounded like a word, then faded before I could comprehend. I remembered the nurse's call, the patient wandering in the closed wing. At first, it had seemed like a lost person, confused, maybe frightened. But the way the voices threaded into the air here, the unnatural weight in the hall, it told a different story. Something else lingered, something patient, something that didn't belong to the natural world. The lights flickered again, throwing the hallway into deep shadow, then weak illumination. In that brief dark, I thought I saw movement. Not a person, not really. More like a shape folding into itself, stretching along the far wall. A shadow, impossible in its angles, bending as if the world itself had been warped. I blinked. Gone. Only the whispers remained. I swallowed hard, forcing calm. Step by step, footstep by footstep, counted breaths. I tried to focus on concrete details, the peeling paint on the walls, the scuffed linoleum beneath my boots, the rust along the edges of the old fire doors. Anchors, reality, something to hold on to. But the voices, they teased the edges of comprehension, like the mind could almost parse them, then was yanked back into uncertainty. A door opened somewhere down the hall, soft, sliding. But there was no one visible, just shadows pooling beneath the threshold. I froze. The whispers intensified, layering over each other, and for a moment, I thought I heard my own name. Faint, almost imperceptible. My pulse spiked, chest tightening. The logical part of me shouted, impossible. But every instinct screamed, real. I stepped closer to the threshold, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The voices were clearer now, just for a moment. Snippets of conversation, laughter, sighs, gasps. Then, when I focused fully, they dissolved into nothing, leaving only silence. A silence heavier than the voices had been, pressing against me. I could feel it in my chest, wrapping around my ribs, curling into my lungs. Another step, careful, deliberate. The hallway seemed to twist again, just subtly but perceptibly. Shadows at the edges stretched. The whispers grew fainter, more deliberate, like they were testing me, teasing me, drawing me deeper. I swallowed again, forcing myself to focus on the door numbers, the layout of the hospital, the faint glow of exit signs far ahead. Anchors. Everything was anchored in reality, except the voices, except the shadows, except the way the hallway breathed around me. I paused at room 308. The door was closed. The faint hum of fluorescent lights behind it, distorted, warped. And then a whisper, soft, almost intimate, right by my ear. Why are you here? I spun, flashlight cutting wild arcs through the hallway. Empty. No one. Nothing. Just shadows curling along the ceiling, bending along walls, impossible shapes stretching at the edges of perception. My throat went dry. My pulse thundered. Step by step, I forced myself forward. Footstep by footstep, counting, anchoring. I reached the nurse's station at the far end of the hall. Abandoned. Papers neatly stacked, pens in their holders. Coffee cup half full, condensation clinging to the rim. No sign of movement. And yet, I could feel it. That same presence. Patient. Watching. Waiting. Counting. The whispers returned. Soft. Layered. Teasing. Faint laughter. Soft crying. Fragments of conversation. Voices of patients. Of nurses. Of ghosts I didn't recognize. Overlapping in a symphony of tension. Each syllable pressed against my mind, curling into my thoughts, teasing my memories, warping perception. I had to concentrate just to remain grounded. I leaned against the counter, flashlight sweeping the hall behind me. Shadows moved with impossible grace, curling into corners, stretching along walls. The whispers swirled around me, teasing, almost coherent for a heartbeat, then dissolving into nothing. Patient, observing, waiting. A sudden faint sound, steps. Soft, deliberate, echoed from the far end of the hall. Not human, not anything I recognized. My pulse spiked. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my breathing. Every instinct screamed to turn, to run, but I forced myself to move forward, flashlight cutting through the fog of shadows and whispers. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent. Fragmented words, my name, numbers, times, places, blurred with laughter, sighs, and cries. Real and hallucinated, interwoven, impossible to distinguish. I shook my head, trying to force clarity. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchor yourself. Focus. Reality. I rounded a corner, and the voices shifted suddenly, fading, leaving only a faint hum in the walls, like the building itself was breathing. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching impossibly long. And then, one of the whispers, soft, deliberate, clear. You can't leave. I froze. The words wrapped around me, curling into my chest, pressing into my lungs. Not human, not natural. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep into my lungs. Rational thought screamed, impossible. But my gut told me otherwise. I moved on. Flashlight slicing through darkness, scanning walls, doors, ceiling. Every shadow bent, twisted, stretched beyond the laws of physics. Every flicker of light seemed deliberate, controlled. And the voices, patient, waiting, observing, counting. I reached the end of the hallway near the old ICU. The door closed. The whispers faded slightly, lingering at the edges, soft, patient. I could feel the weight of the presence behind me, around me, pressing against my mind. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the physical world, the door handles, the peeling paint, the polished linoleum beneath my boots, anchors, everything anchored. And yet, in the corner of perception, a shadow shifted, impossible angles, bending around the edges of the ceiling. The whispers returned, soft, intimate, teasing. You're not supposed to be here. But you came anyway, patient, waiting, observing. I swallowed hard, forcing rational thought. Empty hallway, no one alive. Reality, anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep. And yet, the hallway itself seemed alive, breathing, pulsing, twisting. The whispers threaded into my mind, teasing, probing, impossible to ignore. I forced myself to move back, retracing steps, keeping eyes on shadows, ears on whispers. Every echo, every flicker of light, every curl of shadow reminded me that the presence was patient, waiting, observing, counting. By the time I reached the stairwell leading down, my pulse was relentless in my ears. The whispers had faded slightly, but their presence lingered in the air, in my chest, in the curve of shadows along the walls. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. And as I descended the stairs, flashlight cutting through the dim light, I understood with a cold certainty. Some things are not bound by logic, by time, by human perception. Some things wait, some things observe, and some things, patient and deliberate, count your every step, every breath, every heartbeat. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep moving. Downward, away from the whispers, down the stairs, into the relative safety of the first floor. But even as the air cleared slightly, the memory of voices, impossible and layered, pressed against my mind. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. Always. I thought I was leaving it behind. The whispers, the shadows, the impossible hallway. I thought that once I stepped away from room 306, from the closed wing, the air would clear, the weight would lift. But the moment I turned my back, I realized just how wrong I was. The hall stretched out before me, dim and narrow, fluorescent lights flickering weakly overhead. Every step I took echoed, bouncing back at me, but beneath the normal hospital sounds, there was something else. Movement. Fleeting. Just at the edge of vision. Shadows curling, elongating, bending around corners. Silhouettes, too vague, too fast to be human, yet undeniably present, skittering just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam. I stopped, heart thundering. I held the beam steady, sweeping slowly from wall to wall. Nothing. Only shadows, impossible angles, curling along walls and ceiling, pooling in corners. But the sensation lingered. The weight pressed against my chest. I could feel eyes, hundreds, maybe thousands, tracking me with patient intent. A flicker of movement on the far wall made me spin. A figure, barely there, almost gone, like smoke caught in a stray breeze. I blinked, gone. My pulse spiked. Step by step, I forced myself forward, boots echoing against the linoleum, each footstep deliberate, each breath counted. I tried to anchor myself to reality. The lights overhead, the peeling paint along the walls, the scuffed linoleum beneath my boots, anchors. Logical, tangible, but the wing itself seemed alive, breathing, pulsing, watching. The fleeting silhouettes returned, just for a heartbeat curling around corners, vanishing into walls that shouldn't have allowed it. I swallowed hard, forcing rational thought. Empty wing, no staff, no patience. Just shadows, whispers, memories pressed into the air. Yet the feeling of being followed, observed, patient, deliberate, it clung to me, curling into my spine, pressing against the back of my neck. Another shift, a flicker at the corner of my eye. I spun. Nothing. But the feeling, pressure, cold, metallic, remained. I could almost hear soft footsteps behind me, brushing just beyond perception. Not human. Not alive in ways I understood. Patient, watching, counting. I forced myself to keep moving, step by step, footstep by footstep. Every flicker of light, every curling shadow demanded attention. My mind tried to rationalize. Hallucination, stress, exhaustion. But the air felt dense, heavy, pressing against my skin. Something else was here. Something that moved with intent, patient, and deliberate. The hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending in ways my mind could not comprehend. Shadows pooled at impossible angles. I thought I saw a figure leaning against the wall just at the edge of the beam. Human? Maybe. But when I focused fully, it was gone. Just a ripple in the shadows, a curl of smoke in the dim light. I swallowed hard, chest tight, and forced myself to breathe. Anchor yourself, logical, rational, step by step. And yet the silhouettes persisted. Always at the edge of vision, fleeting, impossible, teasing. I could feel them pressing closer, brushing against perception. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. A soft creak echoed from down the hall. I spun, flashlight sweeping, searching. Nothing. Only shadows bending, curling, impossible angles stretching along walls and ceiling. The air was thick now, metallic tang curling in the back of my throat. Something had been here. Something was here. And I could not see it fully. Another step forward. Another flicker. Another silhouette, faster this time, darting behind the doorway of an old storage room. I froze, held my breath. The presence lingered, pressing into my mind, whispering impossibly soft, almost intimate words that I could not quite comprehend. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I forced movement again, step by step, footstep by footstep. My flashlight trembled slightly, my pulse relentless. Each corner seemed to stretch, the walls bending, the ceiling curling slightly as if alive. Shadows flickered independently of light, moving with intent, curling around the edges of vision, just beyond comprehension. I passed room 312, closed, quiet. Yet I could feel it in the air, the lingering presence. Patient, deliberate, impossible to shake. Another flicker of movement. A silhouette longer than human, impossibly thin, just at the edge of the beam. Gone in a blink. But the impression remained, carved into the air, pressing against my mind. I swallowed hard, forcing rational thought. Empty wing, no one here. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. Yet the air itself seemed alive, dense, pressing, moving with intent, patient, observing, waiting, counting. Another creak, soft, deliberate. Footsteps, no, too precise, too unnatural. I spun, flashlight cutting wild arcs through the shadows. Nothing, just the silhouettes at the edges, fleeting, teasing. I tried to convince myself, hallucination, stress, exhaustion. But instinct screamed, real, patient, watching, waiting. I forced myself to move again, step by step, footstep by footstep. Each flicker of light, each curl of shadow, each whisper in the air pressed against me, threading through my mind. The silhouettes followed, always at the edge, impossible, ephemeral. I could feel eyes tracking me, counting breaths, noting every heartbeat. I reached the end of the hall, stairs leading downward. Flashlight sweeping, shadows curling along walls, ceiling, floor. The presence lingered, dense, metallic, cold, patient, observing, waiting, counting. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to descend, to put distance between me and the wing, and yet I knew it would follow. Halfway down the stairs, a whisper, soft, intimate, direct. My name. My heartbeat skipped. I froze. The air thickened, curling into my chest, pressing against lungs and ribs. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, impossible to shake. I forced breath, forced step, forced movement. Reaching the first floor, I expected relief. The lights were steadier, the air less oppressive. And yet, shadows clung to corners, stretching impossibly. Whispers lingered at the edges, soft, fragmented, teasing, almost intelligible, patient, waiting, observing, counting. I forced myself to anchor in the real. The floor beneath my boots solid, the walls scuffed, the exit signs glowing, anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. And yet, even here, away from the wing, I could feel it. Patient, watching, following, counting. I paused near the main corridor, flashlights sweeping the space, shadows flickering just beyond. The silhouettes, fleeting, impossible, danced at the edges of vision. Each one a memory, a fragment, an echo of something not human. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep into my lungs. Logical thought, empty hospital, no staff, no patients, anchors. But the wing remembered. Room 306, the closed corridors, the shadows, the whispers, the impossibly fleeting silhouettes, they followed. Patient, watching, waiting, counting. I forced myself forward, heading toward the exit. Each step deliberate, measured, heartbeat loud in my ears. But even as the doors loomed ahead, the shadows pressed at the edges of perception, curling into corners, bending impossibly. The whispers, soft, teasing, layered with memory and hallucination, pressed against my mind. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. I reached the exit doors, my hand on the handle cold and slick with sweat. One last glance down the hall. Shadows flickered, fleeting, curling impossibly. Whispers teased at the edge of comprehension. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. I pushed through the doors into the night, the cold air biting, grounding me, anchoring me in the tangible world. The hospital loomed behind me, silent, still, and yet the memory, the presence, lingered. Patient, watching, waiting, counting, always. Even as I drove away, headlights cutting through the night, the fleeting silhouettes haunted the corners of my vision. Shadows curling, bending impossibly, following me down roads that should have been empty. I tried to shake them, tried to dismiss them as fatigue, imagination, stress, but the feeling remained. Patient, watching, waiting, counting. And I knew, with the cold certainty that chills the spine, that some things are never left behind. Some things follow, silent, deliberate, patient, always counting, waiting, observing, shadows at the edge of vision, flickering just beyond comprehension, threading into memory, into perception, into reality. And I understood with a weight I could not shake, that the wing, the closed corridors, the empty rooms, the whispers, the shadows, they were not gone. They never leave. They wait, patient, watching, observing, counting, always. The call came just past midnight. My cruiser idling on the edge of the county line, radio static humming softly, the wind dragging loose leaves across the asphalt. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, but the edge of tension slipped through when she relayed the farmer's words. "My animals." "They're acting weird. Something's in the barn." I grabbed the keys, shoved the radio down, and rolled toward the farm. The road narrowed quickly, worn asphalt giving way to gravel, trees pressing in from both sides. The moon was just a sliver, and shadows pooled along the edges of the road, thick and black. Every mile I drove, the sense of isolation grew heavier, like the air itself was thickening. By the time I reached the farm, silence had fallen like a blanket, heavy and complete. The farmhouse was dark, windows black, curtains drawn tight. The barn sat to the side, looming, the smell of hay and earth faint in the cold night air. I killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight in hand. The animals were quiet at first. I could hear the distant rustle of leaves, the faint whistle of the wind through the trees, but nothing else. No lowing, no clucking, no bleating, nothing. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I approached the barn slowly. The farmer appeared at the doorway, face lined with worry, hands trembling slightly as he wiped at dirt on his overalls. "Sheriff," he said, voice tight, "something's in there." "My cows, my chickens, they're not right." I nodded, forcing calm into my tone. "Show me." He hesitated, then pushed the door open. The smell hit me immediately. Stale hay mixed with something metallic, almost sweet. The animals inside weren't calm, not in the usual way. The cows huddled in a tight corner, lowing softly, heads jerking toward shadows that shifted just beyond the light of the hanging bulb. Chickens clucked nervously, feathers ruffled, wings twitching. Even the old barn cat, normally perched lazily on a beam, hissed and crouched low, tail whipping. I shined my flashlight around. Nothing moved, at least nothing I could see. But the sense of being watched pressed in, dense and suffocating. My hand tightened on the flashlight handle. Something was here. Something had been moving among the animals, deliberate, patient, unseen. The farmer shivered. "I hear it." Footsteps. Soft, circling, sometimes right behind me. Then gone. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my own fear in check. "Any idea what it could be?" He shook his head. "No, but I've been farming here my whole life. Never seen anything like this. Animals, they know. They feel it." I stepped closer to the cows, sweeping my flashlight along their flanks. Eyes wide, dilated, low, trembling breaths. They watched me, but their gaze kept flicking past me, toward corners where shadows gathered and shifted just out of reach. Something moved there. Something small, quick. But when I focused, nothing. Just dark space. The cat hissed again, sharp and frantic. Feathers rustled as the chickens scuttled to a far corner, wings flapping, then froze mid-motion, staring toward the same darkness. My pulse thudded in my ears. The barn felt alive, walls stretching slightly, ceiling beams bending impossibly, air thick with expectation. I swallowed hard, forcing calm, anchors, reality, footsteps in the hay crunching under my boots. I called out softly. "All right, whoever's here, show yourself," silence answered. Then faint, almost imperceptible, something moving in the shadows. A whisper of sound, deliberate, circling. Not human, not animal. Something else. Patient. Waiting. Observing. I swept my flashlight slowly, catching glimpses of movement that vanished the moment I focused. Small shadows darting between hay bales, slipping behind posts, curling along beams. My pulse quickened, chest tight. Step by step, I moved deeper into the barn, careful not to startle the animals further. The farmer followed close, muttering prayers under his breath. "I don't know what it is," he said. I've never heard anything like it." "My animals. They know," I nodded, feeling it too. That presence in the air, hovering, patient, deliberate. Not bound by logic, not tethered to reality the way the animals or I were. The hairs on my neck rose, a cold weight pressing along my spine. I reached the far corner of the barn. Shadows pooled there, curling impossibly along the walls. The cows backed away slightly, lowing softly, trembling. Chickens scattered, clucking frantically, then froze again, staring into the same corner. The cat hissed, arched, tail bristling. I shined my light directly into the corner. Nothing. Just shadows, impossible angles stretching along the walls and floor. But the air felt thick. Thick with expectation, with something waiting, patient, observing. I swallowed, forcing breath deep into my lungs. "All right, whatever this is, it's not leaving yet," I muttered. "But I'll find it. I'll figure it out." The farmer's eyes were wide. "Be careful," he said. "It's not like anything we've seen before." I moved closer, flashlight sweeping every beam, every shadow, every stack of hay. And then I saw it, or thought I did. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a shape that wasn't fully formed. Something small, almost human in silhouette, but wrong. Too thin, too long, bending angles that shouldn't exist. It slipped along the shadows, curling, patient, observing, waiting. I spun the flashlight, catching only darkness. The animals reacted instantly. Lowing, clucking, feathers ruffling, tails twitching. The cat hissed again, back arched. They all reacted to it, all sensed it, though I couldn't see it clearly. Footsteps? I thought I heard them. Soft, deliberate, brushing along the floorboards, circling, patient. I swallowed hard, trying to force logic. Empty barn? Just animals. Anchors. Reality. But the weight in the air pressed against me. Metallic, cold, deliberate. The farmer whispered, voice trembling. "It's watching? It's always watching." I nodded slowly, keeping my flashlight steady, breathing shallow. Step by step, I moved deeper. Flashlight sweeping. Shadows twisting. Something, patient and deliberate, circling, observing, always just out of reach. I could feel it in the corners of my vision, in the small hairs on my arms, in the tight press of air against my chest. The barn itself seemed alive. The walls shifted subtly, ceiling beams curling just slightly, impossible angles that the mind struggled to process. Shadows flickered along the edges of perception, teasing, moving, patient, watching, waiting, counting. I paused in the center, flashlight sweeping, breath held. The whispers of movement, soft, deliberate, impossible to place, circled around me. Something small, fast, impossible, threading through the air. The farmer backed away slightly, muttering prayers. I swallowed again, forcing calm. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. The animals trembled, pressed to corners, still watching, still sensing. The presence, it lingered. Patient, waiting, observing, counting. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, a sound. A sigh? A whisper? Something that belonged neither to human nor animal. My pulse spiked, chest tight. I spun the flashlight. Nothing. Just the shadows curling along walls. Impossible shapes bending at angles that made no sense. I forced movement again. Circling the barn slowly, flashlight sweeping every beam, every stack of hay, every shadow. And with each step I could feel it. The presence. The patient observation. The impossible patience. The knowledge that I was being counted, every step, every breath, every heartbeat. Finally, I backed toward the doorway. The animals followed reluctantly, still huddled, still tense. The farmer whispered, voice trembling, "I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's human." I swallowed hard. Hand on the doorframe, flashlight beam steady. "I don't either," I said. "But I know it's here, and it's not leaving." The barn settled behind us, quiet now, but alive with memory. Shadows pressed into corners, curling impossible. The animals remained uneasy, sensing what I could not fully see. And I knew, with that cold certainty that presses like stone in the chest, that the presence, the patient, deliberate, impossible presence, remained. Watching, waiting, counting, always. We stepped outside. Cold night air wrapped around me, grounding, tangible. The moon, a thin sliver, casting long shadows across the ground. The barn loomed behind, silent, yet alive with memory and presence. The farmer glanced back, fear etched deep into his face. I'll be back," I said, voice low. "We'll figure it out. But it's not gone." Not really. And even as we drove away, headlights cutting through the dark, the feeling lingered. Patient, watching, waiting, counting. Always. The road stretched straight and flat for miles, cutting through the farmland like a thin ribbon of asphalt. Nothing moved except the wind rustling the dry stalks of corn and wheat. I gripped the wheel tighter, headlights slicing through the night, painting long, distorted shadows across the fields. The silence was heavy, not natural, pressing in from every side, and I felt it immediately, an isolation so thick it seemed to cling to my skin. I passed the first farmhouse an hour back. Lights off, empty. The roadsides were dotted with barns, silos, rusted tractors half swallowed by weeds. Nothing stirred. No flicker of movement except the occasional deer, startled, bounding across the fields, disappearing instantly. And yet I could feel it. The land itself seemed alive, holding its breath, watching, waiting. A movement flickered in the corner of my eye. I swerved slightly, heart thudding, flashlight reflexively sweeping to the field. Nothing. just shadows stretching long and thin in the beam of the headlights. I blinked, forcing my pulse to slow, telling myself I was tired, exhausted even. Long night, long drive. Rational thoughts, anchors. But the unease didn't leave. It pressed along my ribs, tight and insistent. The shapes appeared again, distant this time, just silhouettes against the horizon. Human maybe, but wrong. The way they moved, jerky, deliberate, almost floating, made my stomach twist. I squinted, trying to focus, but they seemed to shift whenever I looked directly. Blink, gone. Step forward, gone. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel like it could anchor me to reality. The wind picked up, carrying strange sounds across the fields. Not the natural rustle of crops. Something lower, deliberate. Soft whispers, breathing, a scraping, distant but insistent. I froze for a moment, flashlight sweeping instinctively, headlights scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just the fields, wide and empty, or so it seemed. I remembered the call from the farmer. Animals acting strange, fear in his voice. And suddenly, I realized I felt it here too. Not animals, not human, but something else. Something patient. Observing, waiting, counting. The isolation was part of it. Pressing in, making every shadow, every shape. Every rustle feel deliberate. I kept driving, step by step, mile by mile. Headlights cutting through fog that had started to roll in, curling low to the ground. The shapes moved again. I saw them briefly, a thin figure at the edge of the corn, then another. Blink, gone. I tried not to stare, tried to anchor myself to the asphalt beneath my tires, the hum of the engine, the faint scent of exhaust and dry earth. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. The fields stretched endlessly. No houses, no lights, no signs of life, just wide open land, black and still. And yet the shapes kept appearing at the periphery, twisting and jerking in ways that made no sense. Human-like, but wrong. They were patient, observing, waiting, counting. I slowed the cruiser, scanning the edges of the road. The headlights caught the edge of a fence, the twisted metal glinting faintly. Shadows flickered beyond, curling along the ground, moving as if they had purpose. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was fatigue, stress, imagination. But the shapes weren't just figments, they were deliberate, shifting with intent. I could feel it in the air, in the weight of the silence pressing down. The road bent slightly, and a flicker of movement caught my peripheral vision. I jerked the wheel, headlights slicing across a field. Nothing, just the dark, empty earth. But the unease tightened around my chest, curling into my ribs. Step by step, mile by mile, I moved forward, every muscle taut, every nerve straining. A low sound carried across the fields, a scraping, a whisper, almost a sigh. I froze, engine idling, listening. The shapes didn't respond to headlights, didn't scatter like normal animals would. They lingered, patient, deliberate, just at the edge of perception. I could feel eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, tracking me across the fields, counting, observing, waiting. I swallowed, forcing calm. Anchors, the hum of the engine, the feel of the wheel under my fingers, step by step, footstep by footstep. And yet the field itself seemed alive, bending in the corners of vision, curling, shifting impossibly. The shapes moved again. I could see them clearer now, thin, elongated silhouettes. They moved not as humans, but in ways that made the mind ache to comprehend. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deliberate. Flashlights swept across the dashboard, dim glow reflecting off the windshield. The shapes flickered, appearing and disappearing in the fields. One closer, maybe 20 yards off. Blink, gone. Another flicker near the edge of a cornfield. Blink, gone. My pulse thundered, chest tight, hands trembling slightly. Anchors, reality, step by step. The fog thickened, curling along the asphalt, hugging the fields. Shapes became harder to see, blending into the mist. But I could feel them, patient and deliberate. Watching, waiting, counting. The isolation amplified it. Made the land itself seem complicit, pressing against me, bending reality slightly with intent I couldn't name. A sudden flicker in the headlights caught one shape closer this time. Thin and impossibly tall, standing just at the edge of the corn. I blinked, and it stretched impossibly, angles bending wrong, elongating, tilting. Then it vanished entirely. Nothing in the fog, nothing on the road. Just the hum of the engine, the whisper of wind, and the pressing weight of the fields. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing my pulse to slow, forcing rational thought. Anchors, the road, asphalt, headlights, step by step, footstep by footstep. The shapes weren't gone. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. Every shadow, every flicker at the edge of vision, threaded into perception. I passed a dilapidated barn on the left, faint outline against the fog. Something moved just beyond it. Slow, deliberate. Not human, not animal. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep into my lungs, forcing forward motion mile by mile, foot by foot. The horizon remained black, featureless, save for the occasional dark silhouette that disappeared the moment I tried to focus. Trees, fences, barns, but nothing solid. And yet the feeling of being watched never left. Patient, deliberate, observing, counting. I thought I heard whispers, low, just barely audible over the engine. Or maybe it was the wind, but the sense of intent, the deliberate, patient observation, pressed in like a weight I couldn't shake. Shadows flickered along the edges of the fog, twisting impossibly, curling around angles that shouldn't exist. Step by step, mile by mile, I pressed onward. The shapes moved again, closer this time, at the edge of the headlights, flickering in and out, patient, deliberate. I tried to blink, tried to focus, tried to anchor myself. Anchors, the asphalt, the dashboard, the wheel under my fingers. But the weight of the fields pressed in, bending, twisting, alive, watching, waiting, counting. A low metallic sound, scraping along something I couldn't see, carried across the night air. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The shapes flickered once more, closer to the road, just at the edge of vision. Then gone. Silence. The fog thick, the fields wide, the night absolute. And yet the presence lingered. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing every muscle to stay tense, every nerve alert. The shapes had been with me the whole way, threading through the fog, bending reality, curling in the corners of perception. I could feel them counting steps, counting breaths, counting heartbeats. Patient, watching, waiting, counting. Finally, a bend in the road. Lights from a distant farmhouse broke the horizon. Normalcy, anchors, reality. But even with the glow of civilization ahead, I could feel them in the fields behind me, lingering, patient, deliberate, watching, waiting, counting. And I realized, with that cold certainty that presses like stone into the chest, that the shapes weren't tied to the road or the fog or the night. They were patient, always watching, always counting. And no matter how far I drove, how fast I pressed the accelerator, they would remain at the edge of vision, in the periphery, threading themselves into memory, into perception, into reality itself, step by step, footstep by footstep. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. The barn door groaned as I pushed it open, the old hinges crying into the night. I froze for a moment, hand gripping the flashlight tightly, ears straining. The smell hit me first, stale hay mixed with earth, and something metallic, almost sweet, lingering at the edges of smell. The wind outside carried faint sounds, distant rustling of trees, the low hum of insects. But inside the barn there was only stillness, or so it seemed. I stepped across the threshold, boots crunching over old straw scattered on the wooden floor. The beam of my flashlight swept across empty stalls, weathered beams, shadows pooling in corners that the light barely reached. The farmer's words came back to me. My animals. They're acting weird. Something's in the barn. But there was nothing alive here now. The animals were gone or hidden, but the barn itself, it felt alive. The shadows twisted in ways that didn't make sense. One moment, a beam of light would hit an empty corner. The next, it would curl into angles that seemed impossible. I blinked, adjusted my grip on the flashlight, and stepped further in. A whisper brushed past me, soft, deliberate, impossible to locate. My heart thudded. I turned sharply, sweeping the beam across every corner, every post, every darkened stall. Nothing. Yet the air felt thick, heavy, almost viscous. Something was here, patient, deliberate, moving in ways my mind couldn't comprehend. Step by step, I moved deeper into the barn. The shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, curling independently of the flashlight beam. They weren't caused by the light. They weren't caused by anything physical I could see. And yet they moved with intent, deliberate, curling along beams, stretching impossibly along walls and posts. I swallowed hard, forcing calm, anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. But the whispers returned, low, fragmented, curling through the air, teasing the edge of comprehension. Something patient, deliberate, observing, counting. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, but the sounds didn't match what I heard beyond them. Scraping, brushing, something moving just out of reach. I froze, scanning the shadows. A shape flickered at the edge of the beam. Thin, elongated, impossible angles. Blink. Gone. Only the shadows remained, curling and twisting, alive in ways the mind resisted. I forced myself forward. Each step deliberate, measured. Flashlight sweeping, heart racing. Another whisper. Closer this time. Words, almost, but incoherent, blending with the wind, the rustle of straw. I could feel the presence, patient, deliberate, counting every heartbeat, every movement. The barn seemed to breathe. Beams creaked, straw shifted as if stirred by something unseen. Shadows pooled unnaturally, stretching, curling along the edges of perception. I stepped into the center of the barn, flashlight sweeping slowly. The air pressed in, heavy, metallic, thick with expectation. The whispers circled around me, threading through the silence, impossible and patient. I passed the old hayloft ladder. Shadows curled along its sides. I could feel them, watching, waiting. Step by step, I moved closer. The whispers grew faintly sharper, more distinct, threading into fragments I could almost catch but not fully understand. They weren't human voices, but they were deliberate, patient, teasing, observing, counting. I caught another flicker at the edge of the beam, a shadow twisting unnaturally along a stall post. My pulse spiked. I blinked. Nothing. Only the long shadows curling impossibly, bending the corners of the barn as if the walls themselves were alive. I swallowed hard, forcing rational thought. Empty barn. No animals, anchors, reality, footstep by footstep, step by step. And yet the air itself felt alive, pressing against my skin, curling into my lungs, threading into my pulse, patient, deliberate, observing, counting. Another whisper. Closer this time, circling behind me, impossible to locate. I spun, flashlight sweeping wildly. Nothing. Just shadows curling along the walls, along the beams, impossible angles stretching into corners my mind resisted comprehending. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I forced myself forward. The old feeding troughs, empty now, seemed to echo movement. Shadows flickered along their edges, curling and bending in ways that shouldn't exist. The barn cat, if it had been here, would have hissed, arched back, tail whipping. But there was nothing alive, only the presence, patient and deliberate, threading through the shadows, counting, observing, waiting. I moved toward the far corner. The beam of my flashlight caught a faint shape there, small, almost human, impossibly thin. I blinked. Gone. Just the shadows, curling, teasing, twisting at the edge of comprehension. The whispers pressed closer, threading around me, almost intelligible, but slipping just beyond understanding. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, step by step. I circled the barn, flashlight sweeping every beam, every post, every shadow. The air grew heavier, denser, metallic in taste, pressing into my chest. The shadows moved independently of light, defying logic, twisting into impossible angles, coiling along beams and walls. Every flicker of motion pressed at the edges of my mind, threading fear into memory. I paused in the center again, breathing shallow, pulse hammering. The whispers threaded around me, teasing, impossible, patient. Something had been here. Something still was. The barn, the shadows, the impossible angles, they were deliberate, observing, counting, waiting. I stepped toward the hayloft ladder. Shadows twisted along its rungs. I could feel them curling into the edges of perception, teasing the corner of vision, impossible and patient. I forced myself to breathe, forcing rational thought. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep. The far stall held a concentration of shadow. I approached cautiously. A flicker, a thin shape moving, curling, patient. I blinked. Nothing. Only darkness, impossible angles, curling, stretching beyond comprehension. Whispers brushed against the edge of hearing, soft, deliberate, teasing, step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, observing, waiting, counting. I moved toward the exit, the barn looming silent around me. Shadows lingered in corners, curling impossibly. The whispers pressed through the air, threading into the weight pressing against my chest, my ribs, my lungs. Step by step, I forced myself to the door. Anchors. Reality. Footstep by footstep. I reached the threshold, hand on the doorframe, flashlight beam sweeping the interior. Shadows twisted at impossible angles, impossible shapes, fleeting at the edge of vision. The whispers lingered, teasing, patient, deliberate. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I pulled the door open. Cold night air bit my skin, grounding me, anchoring me to the tangible world. I stepped outside. The barn loomed behind me, silent, still, but alive with memory and presence. Shadows lingered at the edges, impossible shapes twisting just out of focus. The whispers followed faintly, fading but not gone, threading into the night air. The farmer stood nearby, pale, tense. I nodded once, voice low, steady. It's here. It's patient, watching, counting, and it doesn't leave. He swallowed hard. I don't know what it is. I shook my head. Neither do I. But I felt it too. Patient, deliberate, waiting, observing, counting, and it's not done yet. Even as we walked back to the cruiser, headlights cutting through the dark fields, I could feel the barn behind us, alive with impossible shadows, whispers, presence. Step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, observing, waiting, counting. Always. And I knew, as cold dread pressed into my spine, that the shadows in that barn were not confined to walls or rafters. They threaded themselves into memory, into perception, into reality itself, patient, deliberate, and always counting. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. I stepped back from the barn doorway, letting the cold night air wash over me, hoping the distance would ease the pressure that had been building in my chest. But it didn't. The weight didn't lift. It pressed harder now, like the darkness itself had density, and I could feel it in the small hairs on my arms, along the back of my neck, deep in my chest. Something moved in the corner of the barn, subtle, deliberate, not a shadow curling impossibly, not a flicker at the edge of vision, something alive. My pulse quickened. I flicked the flashlight beam across the interior, sweeping every stall, every post, every corner. The barn was empty. Empty except for one animal, a single cow, or at least it looked like one at first glance, stood near the far wall. Its coat was dark in the shadows, glossy under the faint moonlight filtering through the gaps in the barn boards. It was completely still, not breathing, not shifting its weight, nothing, except for its eyes. I froze. They were too aware. Human-like awareness burned in those eyes. Deep, unsettling, patient. Watching me, counting me, reading me. I blinked, tried to shake the thought, but the sensation only grew stronger. Step by step, inch by inch, I moved closer, flashlight trembling in my hand. Every instinct screamed that I should run. Every rational thought told me to stay calm, to observe, to anchor myself in reality. But the awareness in those eyes didn't belong to this world, not fully. It pressed into my mind, a cold weight that tangled with my pulse. I swallowed hard, forcing breath deep into my lungs. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. The cow didn't flinch. Its gaze followed me, patient, deliberate. And I realized with a jolt that it wasn't just observing my body, it was reading my fear. Counting my pulse. Waiting. I shone the flashlight closer. The animal's posture was unnatural, rigid, stiff, almost like a statue. Yet there was life in it, in its awareness. And then I noticed the subtle twitch of an ear, a blink of the eye. Not random, deliberate, measured, watching, waiting, counting. A whisper of movement echoed somewhere in the barn, soft but deliberate. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Only the air, heavy and thick, curling along the rafters, pressing against my chest. And the cow, still rigid, still staring, awareness like ice pressing into me. I tried to speak. "Hey, easy. I'm just here to check on things." My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the barn. The cow didn't react. Only its gaze followed me, patient, deliberate, counting. A weight pressed into my chest, slow, insistent. My stomach turned, a knot of unease tightening into something sharper, more primal. I took another step closer. The floorboards creaked under my boots, each sound magnified in the stillness. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears, the blood rushing through my veins. The animal didn't blink. It didn't move. Only those eyes, uncomfortably human, impossibly aware, held me, tethering me to the edge of fear. The shadows in the corners of the barn shifted slightly, but nothing came forward. Nothing left. Just the stillness. Just the press of the air, just that patient, deliberate presence in the far corner. I swallowed, forcing calm, trying to anchor myself. Flashlight beam steady, step by step, footstep by footstep, and yet the awareness in those eyes pressed in, wrapping around my mind, threading into my pulse. It wasn't just seeing me. It was assessing me, measuring me, calculating patience, measuring fear, waiting for something I couldn't name. A faint whisper echoed again, impossible to place. No source, no direction. Just a sound curling through the barn, threading along the rafters, brushing along my skin. I clenched my jaw, forcing every instinct into rational thought. Anchors, reality, step by step. Footstep by footstep, I inched closer. Each step felt deliberate, slow, as if the barn itself had extended time, stretched space. The cow didn't move, but the eyes followed me, patient, deliberate, counting, always counting. I crouched slightly, shining the flashlight directly on its face. The pupils were wide, unblinking, unnervingly human in their awareness. A cold weight pressed into my chest, slow, insistent, the kind of fear that settles into bones and refuses to leave. My mind screamed that this wasn't natural, that it couldn't be. And yet here it was, still, watching, aware, deliberate. I tried to blink, tried to force the thought away. Animals can stare. Animals can be still. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. But the sensation in my chest, the press of the air, the awareness in those eyes, none of it was natural. It pressed into the edges of perception, threading into memory, twisting into understanding that logic couldn't reach. A whisper. Soft, deliberate, a sound that seemed almost like a word, almost like a thought curling around my mind. I shook my head, forcing my pulse to slow, forcing rational thought to surface. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep, but the cold awareness didn't leave. It pressed, patient, deliberate, counting. I stood upright slowly, keeping flashlight trained, eyes locked. The cow didn't flinch, didn't move. Only the awareness, sharp and precise, pressed against my chest. And then, faintly, impossibly, I thought I saw the shadows at the edges of the barn twist, moving slightly toward the cow, coiling around it like they belonged there, feeding it patience, enhancing its awareness. I swallowed hard, feeling bile rise. Anchors, reality, footstep by footstep, step by step. The animal's gaze followed me as I moved, deliberate, unbroken, human in a way that made my skin crawl. I realized then that it wasn't just a cow. It was something else, something patient, deliberate, aware beyond comprehension. And it had been waiting, watching, counting. I backed toward the door, keeping the flashlight trained, careful not to break its gaze. The shadows seemed to curl and shift as I moved, impossible angles bending along walls and beams. The air felt heavier with each step, thick with patient expectation. The farmer's voice echoed faintly behind me, trembling. "Sheriff, what is it?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My focus remained on the eyes, human-like, impossibly aware, threading into my mind, threading into the room. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I retreated toward the doorway. The cold weight pressed into my chest. The whispers threading along the rafters, the shadows coiling subtly, all centering on the far corner where the animal stood. I forced myself outside, into the cold night air, lungs burning as I drew in deep breaths. The barn loomed behind me, silent but alive, heavy with presence, impossible awareness lingering in the corners and shadows. The farmer stared, pale, voice shaking. It's still there?" I nodded slowly, voice low. "It's aware. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, and it isn't leaving." We stood there for a long moment, the cold night air wrapping around us, anchoring me back into tangible reality. But even as I glanced back at the barn, I knew the animal, the last one still aware, was more than it seemed. Shadows seemed to cling to it, impossible shapes curling at the edges of vision. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. Even from outside, its gaze pressed into me, threading into memory, into perception, into understanding. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I realized that whatever it was, whatever awareness it held, it would linger. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. I forced myself to climb into the cruiser, engine humming, headlights piercing the night. The barn faded slowly behind me, but the feeling didn't. That awareness, human-like, patient, deliberate, threading into every thought, every heartbeat, every breath, anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep, but still counting, always counting. And I knew, with a certainty that pressed into my bones, that the last animal, unmoving, aware, patient, was not gone. Not truly. It had been waiting. It was waiting still, and it would continue, threading itself into perception, into memory, into reality, step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. The call came in just past midnight. "Banging noises," the clerk said, voice tight, hurried. "Room 7, nobody else is here. It's strange." I frowned, glancing at the map on my dashboard as I steered the cruiser down the darkened streets. Motels on the outskirts, neon sign flickering weakly, buzzing like it was on its last legs. Quiet neighborhood, mostly empty roads. The kind of quiet that presses against the chest if you let it. I pulled up in front of the motel, the engine's hum the only sound for a moment. Headlights cut across the parking lot, bouncing against cracked asphalt, empty except for a lone car near the office. The neon sign buzzed again, no vacancy, but the rooms behind it were dark, silent, ordinary. And yet I could feel the tension, subtle, almost liquid, pressing against me. Step by step, breath by breath, I reminded myself it was just a noise complaint. The clerk met me at the office door, pale, hands tight around a coffee cup. "Room 7, he said again. "Please, I don't want to go back there." His eyes flicked past me toward the hallway leading to the room. I nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that I understood. Part of the job, part of the instinct. I walked the short distance, boots soft against the worn carpet, each step echoing faintly, unnatural in the emptiness. Room 7 door stood ordinary, banal. A brass number, scratches around the edges. But when I reached for the handle, I felt the vibration before anything hit my ears. A low, insistent thrum like someone was banging from the inside. Slow, deliberate. I paused, hand on the knob, listening. Another thud, then another. Irregular, not in a pattern I could track. Step by step, I forced myself to breathe, to anchor in reality. Rational thought, anchors step by step, footstep by footstep. The sound pressed through the door, not loud but insistent, deliberate. I knocked once. "Sheriff, you okay in there?" Silence. Then another bang. Louder, sharper, almost metallic. My pulse jumped. I blinked, adjusting my focus. Step by step, hand on the door, shoulder braced. Anchors. Reality. Step by step. Footstep by footstep. Door creaked open under my hand, just a fraction, enough for the beam of my flashlight to sweep inside. The room was empty. Bed made. No signs of struggle, no furniture moved. Normal, ordinary, nothing that should have made the noise. Yet the sound persisted. A thud from the far corner. Another from the closet. Slow, deliberate, impossible. I stepped inside, flashlight cutting across beige walls. Floral wallpaper curling at the corners. Carpet worn thin in the middle. Bed perfectly made, nightstand untouched. Nothing alive in the room. Nothing human. And yet the air felt heavy, thick, pressing against my chest, threading into my lungs, into my pulse. Patient, deliberate, waiting, counting. Another thud. Closer this time, right behind the closet door. I froze, heart hammering, breath shallow. Step by step, I moved closer, flashlight sweeping. The closet door creaked slightly, then slammed lightly. No wind, no movement except the sound itself. Impossible. Patient, deliberate, watching. I forced a slow breath, trying to anchor rational thought. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. I reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly. The closet was empty. Hangers lined the bar. Clothes untouched. The floor bare. No explanation. Nothing alive. And yet the room felt wrong, pressing, watching, waiting, patient, counting. I stepped back, beam sweeping the corners again. Shadows pooled naturally in the room. Yet at the edge of vision, they shifted slightly, curling impossibly along the edges of walls and furniture. Blink, gone. Another thud, soft, deliberate from the far corner. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. Only shadows, impossible in shape, bending in ways the mind resists. I tried to speak, voice low, steady. Room's clear. Maybe the pipes or... My words caught in my throat as another thud echoed, this time from the air itself, almost like it pressed against the walls, vibrating the room in a way that wasn't mechanical. Step by step I advanced, forcing rational thought forward. Footstep by footstep. Anchors. Reality. The air in the room pressed in, dense and metallic. A faint whisper brushed past my ear, impossible to locate, curling around my perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. My pulse quickened. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter, forcing it to steady. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep. I approached the far corner again, flashlight sweeping over the walls, over the baseboards. Another soft thud, deliberate, almost rhythmic. The hair on my arm stood, a cold prickling, something in the room pressing on my spine, threading into perception. I blinked. Shadows curled slightly at the corner, almost coiling like tendrils along the floor. Impossible angles, impossible movements. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, the closet again. Another thud from inside. I froze, hand on the handle. Flashlight beam piercing the darkness. The shadows coiled, curling at the edges of perception, teasing, twisting impossibly. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I forced myself closer. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. Nothing inside. Only the press of the room, heavy and deliberate. Another whisper, soft, curling along my ear, teasing comprehension. I spun, flashlight sweeping. Nothing. Shadows shifted in corners. Curling, patient, deliberate. Watching, counting, waiting. I stepped toward the door. Tension coiling in every muscle. Mind resisting the creeping dread threading into perception. Another thud, soft, impossible. I glanced back. Room appeared empty. Normal. Yet the air pressed in. Shadows curled at impossible angles. The whispering lingered, patient, deliberate. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Outside, the clerk waited, pale, trembling. I nodded once. "Room's clear," I said, voice low, though my mind couldn't shake the pressure that lingered, threading into my pulse. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep. I walked back to the cruiser, headlights cutting across empty streets, the motel sign buzzing faintly, flickering weakly. Step by step, anchors, reality, footstep by footstep. And yet, even as I drove away, I could feel the room behind me, heavy. Impossible shadows curling in corners, soft whispers threading into memory. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always, step by step. Footstep by footstep. Patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. I pushed open the door to room 7 again, flashlight cutting through the darkness like a thin knife. The room was ordinary. Bed neatly made, curtains drawn but not closed all the way, carpet worn in the same places it had been last night. Everything should have been normal, and yet the air felt wrong, heavy in a way that settled against my chest and didn't lift. I stepped inside slowly, boots soft against the carpet, ears straining for any sound. The silence pressed against me. It wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. The room held its breath, and I could feel it in the pulse of my own heartbeat. Step by step, I forced myself forward, hand steady on the flashlight. Anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. The first thing I noticed was subtle. A chair, slightly turned away from the desk. Not enough to be alarming on its own, but it hadn't been like that before. And then the dresser drawers, slightly ajar, not fully open, just enough to suggest that someone had been rifling through them or had lingered here. A trace of presence, small, almost imperceptible. And yet, it pressed in, insistent, patient. I swept the flashlight across the room, careful, deliberate. Shadows pooled naturally in the corners. Yet at the edges of the beam, they twisted slightly, curling against the walls, brushing along the furniture like smoke with intent. My stomach nodded. Something was here. Something patient. Something deliberate. Counting me, reading me, waiting. I reached the dresser and glanced down at the open drawers. Nothing taken. Nothing moved. Yet the air above them pressed, dense, thick with anticipation. I could feel a pulse of awareness threading into the room, deliberate, patient. Step by step, I reminded myself, anchors, rational thought, reality, footstep by footstep. Another subtle detail, the windowsill. The curtains weren't disturbed, yet dust patterns had shifted slightly, like fingers had brushed across them. I froze, pulse hammering, blink, breath slow. Step by step, I moved closer. The room didn't breathe, didn't move, and yet I could feel it alive, pressing, curling around the edges of perception. Patient, observing, waiting, counting. A whisper, faint, curling through the air. I spun, flashlight sweeping every corner. Nothing. Only shadows, coiling slightly, impossible angles bending along walls and furniture. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I reminded myself that I was alone. Anchors, reality, step by step. The bed. I moved toward it slowly. The sheets were perfectly made, untouched. Yet the air above them shifted slightly as I approached, as if the room itself exhaled in anticipation. The shadows pooled beneath the bed, curling in ways no natural light should allow. I knelt to glance underneath, empty. But the air pressed against my face, dense, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, waiting. I stood again, flashlight sweeping. Something moved, just at the corner of vision, subtle, almost like a shimmer in the air. I blinked, gone, only the stillness remained, and yet I felt it. Patient, deliberate, threading into perception, threading into memory, pressing into my pulse. Step by step, I moved to the far corner of the room. The closet door shut tight. Another whisper brushed past my ear, impossible to locate, curling along the edges of perception. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter. Anchors, reality, step by step. Footstep by footstep, I reached for the knob, twisting slowly. The closet was empty. Hangers lined neatly, clothes untouched, dust undisturbed. And yet the air pressed heavier, impossible, deliberate. Shadows coiled subtly in the corners, curling at angles my mind resisted. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I forced rational thought into the forefront. Anchors, breath, reality. I turned back to the center of the room. The subtle details pressed together now, The chair, the drawers, the dust patterns on the window, the shadows curling impossibly. Someone or something had been here, or perhaps still was. I felt it in my chest, in my pulse, in the way the air clung to skin, threading into perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. The flashlight beam flickered slightly, or maybe it was my pulse playing tricks. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I moved slowly toward the door. The shadows shifted subtly as I passed, curling along the walls, along the baseboards, threading impossibly with the air. Another whisper, faint, deliberate, brushing past my ear. I spun, nothing, just the stillness, just the waiting, patient, counting, observing. I glanced at the bed one last time. Sheets perfectly made, nothing alive. Yet the room pressed against me with memory and presence. Something had lingered here. Something had counted, observed, threaded into perception, patient, deliberate, impossible. Step by step, I walked toward the door, feeling the weight of awareness pressing into the edges of my mind. I reached the threshold, hand on the knob, flashlight beam sweeping the corners, shadows curled at impossible angles. Another whisper brushing just beyond comprehension. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, breath. Outside, the clerk waited, pale, voice shaking. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly.
The room.
It's empty, but it's not. Something's here. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, and it doesn't leave. He swallowed, eyes wide. I don't know what that means. I shook my head. Neither do I, but I can feel it. It threads into the air, into perception, memory, step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, deliberate, waiting, counting, always. Even as I climbed back into the cruiser, headlights cutting through the quiet streets. I could feel the room behind me, heavy, alive in subtle ways. Shadows curling at impossible angles, whispers threading into memory, pressing into pulse. Step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. I reminded myself to breathe, tried to force rational thought to the forefront, tried to anchor in reality. But even as the motel faded behind me, I knew the awareness, the presence, lingered. Patient, deliberate, waiting, observing, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep, always. I walked the hall outside room 7 slowly, boots soft against the carpet, flashlight in hand. The motel was quiet, or at least it should have been. I had learned over the years that quiet in places like this was deceptive, that silence often carried the weight of things unseen. Step by step, I moved forward, reminding myself to breathe, to anchor in reality. Footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, then it started. A soft thump behind me, faint, deliberate, echoing through the corridor. My pulse jumped, hand tightening on the flashlight. Step by step, I forced myself to continue forward, turning my head slowly, trying to catch the source. Nothing, just the hallway stretching, long and empty. Patient, deliberate, waiting. Another thump, closer this time. My heartbeat rattled in my ears. I stopped, flashlight beam sweeping every door, every shadow. Doors along the hall were closed, ordinary. Room numbers gleamed faintly in the weak overhead light. And yet the sound continued, pacing behind me, soft but deliberate. Footsteps. Someone or something following. I forced a slow breath. Anchors. Reality. Step by step. Footstep by footstep. The mind plays tricks. Empty halls echo. Nothing alive here. And yet the thumps continued. Patient, deliberate, threading into perception, pressing into my pulse. I turned sharply to confront the sound. Nothing. No one. No shifting shadows, no figure in the distance. Just the hallway, stretching impossibly long, bending at the edges of vision. Another thump, the echo lingering longer than it should. Impossible timing, deliberate, patient, counting. I took a cautious step forward. Another door down the hall creaked, closing softly but distinctly. No wind, no breeze. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I froze. Flashlight beam swinging slowly, tracing the edges of shadows. The door had been opened, now closed. Alone, empty, patient, observing, waiting, counting. I advanced again, slower now, mind tight, pulse straining. Another door, another soft thud. Behind me, footsteps pacing just at the edge of hearing. My jaw clenched, breath shallow, step by step. Anchors, reality, footstep by footstep. The hallway seemed to stretch further than it should, the light bending oddly, shadows pooling in corners without reason. Every instinct screamed to leave, to retreat, but something kept me rooted. Something in the press of the air, the lingering warmth of presence, threading impossibly into perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I reached the far end of the hall. Doors on either side, identical, closed, ordinary. I listened. Nothing. And yet faintly, impossibly, I heard it. A soft step, deliberate, pacing behind me. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Not random. Patient, calculated, watching. I spun. Flashlight beams slicing through shadows. Nothing. But the air felt thick, heavy, pressing against my skin, threading into my pulse. Another soft thump, now to my left, from the room across the hall. I froze, heart hammering, flashlight shaking slightly. Anchors, rational thought. Step by step, footstep by footstep. I stepped closer to the door, hand on the handle. The metal was cold, ordinary. Inside, I could see only shadows pooling naturally, furniture in place. Nothing alive. And yet, I felt it pressing. Something in the air, impossible to place. Deliberate, patient. Watching, counting, waiting. A whisper, soft, curling along the hallway, brushing past my ear. I spun, flashlight slicing shadows. Nothing, step by step. Footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. And still the footsteps continued, echoing faintly, impossibly, in the hall behind me. Patient, deliberate, counting. I moved to the next door, deliberate, careful, flashlight beams steady. Another soft thump inside the room. I froze, nothing alive. Air pressing heavy, subtle vibrations under my boots. Shadows twisting slightly, curling at impossible angles. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality. Another door down the hall slammed softly. I jumped, pulse hammering, flashlight beam shaking. Nothing. No wind, no one. And yet the sound lingered, impossible, deliberate, patient. Watching, counting, waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing calm. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Rational thought, anchors. Step toward the next room. Another soft thump inside. I glanced inside. Nothing. Ordinary. Yet the air pressed against my chest, thick with presence threading into pulse, into perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. The hallway stretched endlessly, shadows curling at edges of vision, impossible angles forming where there should be none. Every door seemed to shift slightly, subtle, just enough to unnerve. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. Another soft step behind me. I froze. Heart hammering, pulse straining. No one there. Nothing visible. Yet the air vibrated with awareness, deliberate, patient, threading into perception, watching, counting, waiting, step by step. Footstep by footstep, I tried to rationalize it. Motel creaks. Floorboards shift. Shadows play tricks, anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. But the feeling persisted. Someone or something aware, deliberate, threading into the hallway, patient, counting. Impossible awareness pressing into pulse. A door slammed again, faint, deliberate. I spun, flashlight beams slicing shadows. Nothing, step by step. Footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I reached the end of the hallway, shaking slightly, pulse loud in my ears. No one. Nothing. Yet the hallway itself felt alive, impossibly aware, pressing into my perception, threading into memory, curling shadows at corners, whispering at the edges. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath. I turned to leave, slow, deliberate, flashlight sweeping corners. A shadow shifted slightly at the far end, impossible angles curling along baseboards. I blinked. Gone. Another soft thump, directly behind me now, echoing faintly. Heart racing. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors. Reality. Rational thought. I reached the office, breath shallow, pulse hammering. Clerk looked up, wide-eyed. "Sheriff, you okay?" I nodded slowly, voice low. "The hall. It's empty. But it's not. Something's here. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, and it doesn't leave." He swallowed, voice trembling. I don't understand." I shook my head, climbing into the cruiser, headlights cutting the quiet streets. Step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, deliberate, waiting, observing, counting, always. Even as the motel faded behind me, the feeling lingered, the impossible awareness threading into memory, the impossible shifting of shadows, the faint, deliberate footsteps echoing in a place that should have been empty. Step by step, footstep by footstep, patient, observing, waiting, counting, always. I pulled out of the motel parking lot slowly, headlights cutting through the black of the night. The neon sign flickered weakly behind me, buzzing faintly, a sickly light that seemed to follow my gaze even as I drove away. Room 7. The number echoed in my mind, repeating like a pulse I couldn't ignore. Step by step, I tried to remind myself I was leaving it behind. Anchors. Rational thought. Footstep by footstep. The highway stretched ahead, empty, silent except for the hum of the cruiser's tires. The motel faded behind me, shadows pooling in the rearview mirror, ordinary at first glance. But then I noticed it. The reflection of a door, a brass number gleaming faintly. Room 7. My stomach knotted, pulse jumping. I blinked, adjusted the mirror. It shouldn't be there. Step by step, I told myself it was fatigue, a trick of shadows, anything rational. Anchors, reality, footstep by footstep. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. Step by step, rational thought, breath. Yet every glance into the mirror, every shift of the dark behind me, revealed the same thing. Room 7. The door, the number. Impossibly following, patient, deliberate, counting, waiting. I turned onto the next road, hoping to shake the image, the impression, the feeling that someone was tracing me. The headlights cut through the trees, shadows curling at impossible angles along the roadside. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality, rational thought. The mirror shifted again, and there it was, closer now. Room 7, gleaming faintly, as if illuminated from some impossible light. I blinked, focused. Nothing should be there. Yet the presence pressed in, heavy, subtle, threading into perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe the motel had imprinted on memory and my mind was replaying it. Anchors. Step by step. Footstep by footstep. Breath. Reality. But the feeling persisted, impossible and deliberate, curling around the edges of perception. Step by step. Patient. Counting. Observing. The rearview mirror, ordinary just minutes ago, now seemed alive. Shadows pooled around the reflected doorway, curling subtly, impossibly, pressing against comprehension. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality. I sped up, pulse hammering, headlights slicing the darkness. The road stretched ahead, empty, ordinary. And yet behind me, room 7 remained, impossibly close, the number gleaming faintly, patient, deliberate, counting. Step by step, footstep by footstep. I glanced again. The door seemed to shift slightly, closer now, pressing, impossible. Shadows curling subtly around the frame, edges bending in ways the mind resists. Breath shallow, anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep, rational thought, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, and I could feel the air in the cruiser thicken, subtle vibrations pressing against the skin. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. Another glance in the mirror. Room 7. Shadows curling impossibly along the edges, brushing against the reflection of the back seat. I forced a slow breath. Anchors, step by step. Footstep by footstep. The mind plays tricks. Reality. Rational thought. But the presence pressed. Patient. Deliberate. Threading into memory. Threading into pulse. I tried to shake it off. Forced myself to focus on the road, headlights cutting a path through black. And yet, every glance in the mirror revealed the same thing. Room 7, closer now, impossibly following, counting, observing, patient, deliberate, waiting, step by step, footstep by footstep. I told myself it was impossible, that no motel room could follow a car down an empty highway. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought, step by step, footstep by footstep. The road curved sharply, and for a moment I thought I had shaken it. The mirror showed nothing but darkness behind me. Relief pressed against my chest, shallow, quick, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality. Then it appeared again. Room 7, gleaming, impossibly close, shadows curling at the edges of the frame. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Breath caught in my throat. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, rational thought. I slammed my hand on the dash, forcing my pulse to slow. "It's impossible," I muttered, voice low, almost a prayer. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep, rational thought, reality. Yet the presence pressed in, subtle, heavy, threading into perception, into memory, impossible to ignore. Patient, deliberate, waiting, counting. The headlights of oncoming cars cut through the darkness. Ordinary, bright, mundane. For a brief moment, the world seemed real again. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, rational thought. But as they passed, the darkness returned, and with it, Room 7, gleaming, patient, deliberate, following. Shadows curling impossibly, pressing against perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep, I tried to blink it away, force rational thought forward. Maybe a reflection in something distant, a trick of shadows, a fleeting image imprinted on memory. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep, breath, reality. Yet every glance in the mirror confirmed it. Room 7, impossibly close, impossible presence pressing, patient, deliberate, counting, waiting. The rear-view mirror became a window into impossibility. I could feel the air thicken behind me, shadows curling subtly along the edges of the reflected doorway. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I drove faster, pulse hammering, headlights slicing the black. The road stretched endlessly ahead, empty, ordinary. And yet behind me, Room 7 remained, impossibly following, gleaming faintly, shadows curling impossibly, patient, deliberate, counting. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, rational thought. I tried to force myself to think of something else. Anything else? Anchors, step by step. Footstep by footstep, breath, rational thought, reality, step by step. Footstep by footstep. But the presence threaded into memory, impossibly persistent. Room 7, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, waiting. Another glance in the mirror. The shadows shifted, curling impossibly along the edges of the doorway. The number gleamed faintly, impossibly. Patient, deliberate, counting, waiting. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. I tried to blink it away, tried to convince myself it was a trick of fatigue, a reflection, an afterimage. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality. But the presence pressed. Impossible, deliberate, threading into perception, into pulse, into memory. Patient, watching, counting, always, step by step. Footstep by footstep. Room 7 gleamed in the mirror, impossibly close, impossibly patient, deliberate, impossible to shake. Shadows curling along edges, pressing into perception, threading into memory, anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. Step by step, footstep by footstep, and even as I drove faster, the highway stretching endlessly before me, I knew it would never leave. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. Room 7, always behind me, impossibly near, threading impossibly into memory, impossibly into perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, rational thought, breath, always. I pulled up to the cemetery just as the last hints of daylight surrendered to night. The caretaker's voice over the radio had been tense, edged with something I couldn't quite name, fear or maybe exhaustion. He'd said graves were being disturbed. Animals, wind, vandals. Nothing should have been moving graves at this hour. And yet, here I was, alone. Headlights cutting swaths of light across tombstones that seemed to lean closer the deeper into darkness I drove. The gates creaked as I pushed through, gravel crunching under tires. I parked near the caretaker's small shack, the only structure in the middle of acres of graves. Shadows stretched long and impossible, bending around the stones as if the night itself wanted to reach for me. I took a deep breath, gripping the wheel a little too tight, reminding myself, anchors, reality, step by step, footstep by footstep. I approached the caretaker, a thin man with a lined face, eyes wide and hollow in the dark. "You saw it?" I asked. He nodded, voice tight.
Something.
"Out there. Between the stones, shifting, moving, like they're alive." I tried to rationalize it step by step, thought by thought. Animals digging, wind shifting dirt, fatigue playing tricks, anchors, reality, footstep by footstep. But as I followed him toward the first row of graves he'd pointed out, I noticed subtle disturbances in the earth, small shifts, uneven impressions in the dirt. Nothing dramatic, but enough to set nerves taut like a taut wire waiting to snap. The caretaker pointed to a freshly disturbed patch. I knelt, shining my flashlight over the soil. Footprints, shallow, not quite human, not quite animal. Step by step, I traced the impressions, every fiber of my being aware of the silence pressing against me. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the night itself exhaled into my lungs. Anchors, step by step, footstep by footstep. Rational thought, reality. A breeze shifted suddenly, carrying a faint whisper through the stones. I froze, pulse hammering. Step by step, I reminded myself, wind, animals, logic, anchors, footstep by footstep. But the whisper repeated, soft, curling along the edge of perception, almost deliberate. Not the wind, not a stray animal, something patient, watching, waiting, counting. We moved slowly, flashlight beams crossing over the rows of graves. Every shadow seemed to twitch slightly, curling along the edges of my vision, bending the geometry of the stones in subtle, impossible ways. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Another shift in the dirt, closer this time. I knelt again, hands brushing over the surface. Soil disturbed freshly, as if someone or something had passed just moments before. But I saw nothing. No footprints leading away, no tracks. Only the impression, impossible, patient, deliberate. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality. A faint sound like scraping echoed across the stones. I spun, flashlight slicing shadows. Nothing, and yet I could feel it. Patient, deliberate, pressing into the edges of perception. Watching, counting, waiting, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, breath, rational thought, reality. I moved closer to another grave, a new mound of earth, still fresh. The caretaker hesitated behind me, voice low. I swear it moved. Just now, I saw it shift. I squinted, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The mound seemed ordinary. And yet the soil pressed differently, subtle angles shifting in ways impossible for a simple mound of dirt. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Another whisper curling around the stones, soft and almost human. I spun, scanning shadows for impossible movement. Nothing. And yet, impossible awareness pressed into my chest, threading into pulse, threading into perception, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, breath. I noticed the old headstones nearby. Some tilted slightly, others perfectly upright, yet all seemed to watch, bending subtly toward me as if listening. The air pressed in heavier, heavier with each breath. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality. I approached the largest stone, the caretaker murmuring behind me, hesitant, tense. The ground before it had shifted as well. I knelt, brushing soil aside. A faint impression like a foot, but not quite human. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, reality, breath, rational thought, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I straightened slowly. The caretaker's eyes darted to shadows beyond the graves. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I froze. A soft scraping, faint, deliberate, echoing from the far edge of the cemetery. Shadows moved subtly, impossibly, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I moved toward the sound cautiously, flashlight slicing darkness. Each step felt weighted, each footfall pressing against the thick night air. Shadows pooled around the graves, curling at impossible angles, pressing subtly against perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. The caretaker stayed back, tense, whispering low prayers to himself. The scraping stopped as I approached the far row, replaced by a faint exhalation in the air, as if the night itself breathed. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I noticed another mound, shifting subtly, impossible angles at the edges. A whisper threaded through the air, curling along the stones, brushing the edge of comprehension. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate. I knelt, brushing soil aside. Nothing human, nothing animal. Yet the earth seemed pressed differently, subtly, impossibly, threading into perception, pressing into pulse. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, rational thought, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A shadow moved across the far end of the cemetery. I froze, flashlight beam swinging slowly, nothing visible. And yet I could feel it. Patient, deliberate, impossible, watching, counting, waiting, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, reality, breath, rational thought. The caretaker shivered behind me. "We need to leave," he whispered, voice low. Something isn't right." I nodded slowly, pulse hammering, eyes scanning shadows. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. And yet the cemetery pressed in, heavy, alive in subtle, impossible ways. Mounds shifting impossibly, shadows curling at edges, whispering at the periphery. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. We walked back toward the gate slowly, step by step, footstep by footstep, mindful of every shadow, every shift of soil, every whisper threading impossibly through the air. Step by step, anchors, reality, rational thought, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Even as we climbed into the cruiser and left the cemetery behind, I could feel it, impossible awareness threading into memory, pressing against pulse, curling shadows at the edges of thought. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the cemetery whole. It wrapped around the headstones, curling along the ground like smoke from some impossible fire. The world beyond the mist vanished completely, leaving only the stones, the graves, and the soft crunch of my boots against the gravel. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam slicing feebly through the gray haze. Every shadow seemed heavier, denser, bending subtly where no bend should exist. I tried to tell myself it was only fog, only the weight of the night pressing in. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Then I saw them, footprints. Shallow impressions pressed into the soil, fading unnaturally mid-step. Step by step they stopped, then vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed the traces. I froze, pulse hammering. Breath shallow, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality. I bent over the first set, flashlight illuminating the strange impressions. They were not human, not quite animal, something else. Deliberate, patient, watching, counting. I traced them with my finger, feeling the subtle give of disturbed soil. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. A soft whisper drifted through the mist. I froze, listening. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, threading through the stones, curling around my perception, brushing impossibly against comprehension. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I moved cautiously forward, flashlight trembling in my grip. Every step pressed against the weight of fog and shadow. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I tried to focus on the ground, on the soil, on the traces before me. But the mist warped the light, twisted shadows along the stones, bending reality just enough to unsettle the mind. Another set of footprints appeared ahead. They vanished mid-step again. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I bent closer, noticing the subtle press of the soil, the impossible edges of the impressions. They did not align with my expectations of gravity, of weight, of nature, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A faint scraping echoed across the mist. I spun, flashlight beam swinging through the thick gray. Nothing. And yet I could feel it, impossible and deliberate, pressing against the edges of perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. I followed the footprints deeper into the cemetery, past rows of stones that leaned subtly, impossibly toward me. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, pressing against my legs, heavy, damp, alive in subtle, impossible ways. Every breath felt thick, laden with tension. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. Shadows pooled along the stones, bending edges impossibly, pressing against perception. I knelt over another impression. The soil had shifted again, mid-step. Impossible angles, impossible weight, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A whisper drifted through the fog again, soft, curling along the stones. I turned, scanning for source. Nothing visible. Yet the sound pressed, threading into perception, into pulse, into memory. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I continued forward, flashlight cutting a feeble path through mist and shadow. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with anticipation, tension, impossibility. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The impressions ahead seemed to shift subtly as I approached. Curling at the edges, bending in ways the mind resisted. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I stopped at a cluster of graves, soil fresh, disturbed. The fog pressed close, curling around stones, threading through the mist like impossible fingers. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The footprints here had vanished completely mid-step, leaving only the impossible impression of presence. A faint exhalation of air brushed my face, cold, damp, impossibly close. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing. And yet, the sense of being observed pressed heavily, threading into pulse, into memory, into perception, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I bent over one grave, brushing soil aside. No body, no footprints leading away, only impressions fading impossibly, hints of movement that shouldn't exist. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A whisper rose again, curling from the mist, soft and low, threading impossibly through perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. Shadows shifted along the stones, edges bending subtly, impossibly. I forced myself to keep moving, tracing the vanishing footprints, stepping carefully between the stones. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The fog thickened further, pressing close, heavy, alive in subtle ways. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I reached the far end of the cemetery, the mist almost opaque. Footprints vanished mid-step, leaving only the impression of impossibility. I knelt, fingers brushing the soil. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The awareness pressed, subtle, impossible, threading through perception, threading through pulse, a soft scrape, a whisper, a curling shadow. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I straightened slowly, flashlight trembling, pulse hammering. The cemetery seemed alive now, every stone bending slightly, shadows curling, fog thickening impossibly. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I began the walk back toward the gate, careful, deliberate, mindful of every shadow, every curl of fog, every impossible impression in the soil. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Even as I reached the cruiser, fog curling around the tires, heavy and damp, I could feel it, the impossible presence threading into memory, pressing against pulse, curling shadows at the edges of thought. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. And I knew, even as the headlights cut through mist and darkness, that the cemetery stones were not done yet. The impressions, the whispers, the impossible movements, they were patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. The fog lingered stubbornly as I made my way deeper into the cemetery. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the mist itself was pulling at my boots. Shadows stretched impossibly along the headstones, curling around the bases as if the earth were trying to hold them in place. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I paused near a cluster of older graves, stones cracked and worn by time. The light from my flashlight caught something that shouldn't have been there, or maybe it shouldn't have been alive. Shapes, or at least the suggestion of them, seemed to peer from between the stones. Not fully visible, just shadows that hung too long, moved too deliberately. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. I tried to convince myself it was tricks of the fog, eyes of animals reflecting light. But my skin prickled, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A whisper stirred in the mist, soft, curling along the stones like smoke. I spun slowly, flashlight sweeping the cemetery. Nothing, and yet I could feel it. Eyes, dozens, maybe more, pressing against me, patient, deliberate, watching, counting, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. I moved forward, careful, deliberate, following the gravel path that wound through the oldest section of the grounds. Every shadow seemed to lean closer, every stone curling subtly toward me, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Another whisper curling impossibly through fog and air. I froze, listening, straining to distinguish sound from imagination. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath. The shapes shifted again, subtle, deliberate, impossible. Shadows that weren't shadows, eyes that weren't eyes. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I bent near a weathered headstone, running a gloved hand over the cold, rough surface. The stone seemed heavier than it should, pressing against perception, tugging subtly at the edges of comprehension, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. The fog pressed in closer, damp and oppressive. Every inhale carried the faint metallic tang of earth and decay, every exhale drawn with caution, step by step, footstep by footstep, anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I glanced over my shoulder. Something shifted between the stones, subtle, impossible to focus on. A flicker of movement, a curling shadow, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I continued along the path, flashlight beam trembling, highlighting cracked stones and tangled weeds, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. The fog thickened further, pressing close, curling around my legs, weaving between stones like invisible fingers. I reached a small mausoleum, its iron gate rusted and hanging at an odd angle. Shadows pooled inside, curling along the walls, forming shapes that pressed against the corners of perception, step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I leaned forward, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The shapes shifted again, too slow to be fleeting, too deliberate to be random. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. A whisper rose from within the fog, curling impossibly along the stones. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I spun, scanning every shadow, every mound, every impossible angle, but saw nothing. The weight of awareness pressed heavier, threading through pulse, threading through memory, threading through every nerve ending. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I moved on, careful, deliberate, flashlight slicing through fog and shadow. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Every stone seemed to lean, every shadow twisted subtly, impossible angles forming at the edges of vision. A faint exhale of air brushed my face, damp and cold, impossibly close. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I reached the cemetery's edge, fog curling around the boundary like a living wall. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Shadows pooled among the stones. Curling subtly, impossibly, pressing at perception. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting. I climbed into the cruiser, heart hammering, pulse thrumming, still aware of the shapes lurking just beyond sight. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. Even as the engine roared to life, fog curling around the tires, I felt it. The impossible awareness threading into memory, pressing against pulse, curling shadows at the edges of thought. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. The road stretched ahead, empty, quiet. But I knew it wasn't over, not yet. Every glance in the rear view caught the mist, curling impossibly, shadows pressing too close, too deliberate. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality, patient, deliberate, watching, counting. The shapes lingered, impossible, patient, deliberate. Every curve of the road, every tree, every distant mound of fog pressed against perception. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, breath, reality. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always, and even miles away. As the lights of the town emerged through the gray curtain of mist, I could feel it. Patient, deliberate, watching, counting, always. The cemetery wasn't done with me. It never would be. Step by step, footstep by footstep. Anchors, rational thought, reality, breath, patient, deliberate, watching, counting.